Eleanor Blake stood at the crest of the long, winding driveway, her gaze fixed on the sprawling Victorian mansion that rose before her like a relic from another era. The wrought iron gates groaned softly as she pushed them open, the cold metal biting into her palms. A gust of wind swept through the ancient oak trees lining the estate, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, an unmistakable perfume of neglect and time past. The mansion's silhouette was jagged against the slate-grey sky, its ornate turrets and gables cast in shadow. The once pristine facade was now marred by peeling paint and creeping ivy that clung desperately to the walls. Eleanor's heart quickened, a mixture of excitement and unease fluttering in her chest. She had inherited this house under strange circumstances, a bequest from a distant relative she barely knew. But the mystery surrounding the property was what truly captivated her journalist's instinct. She pulled her coat tighter around her slender frame and stepped forward, the gravel crunching beneath her polished boots. The heavy front door loomed ahead, its dark wood scarred by weather and time. With a tentative hand, Eleanor pushed it open. A musty breeze greeted her, carrying whispers of forgotten conversations and memories locked away. The grand foyer stretched out before her, its vastness emphasized by the fading light that filtered through stained glass windows high above. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, catching the last rays of sunlight like tiny stars suspended in silence. Eleanor's footsteps echoed on the marble floor as she crossed the threshold, her eyes tracing the intricate carvings of the banister spiraling upwards into darkness. A sudden creak startled her, and she turned sharply to see a figure approaching. Mr. Hargrove, the estate lawyer who had met her earlier in London, stepped into the room, his expression grave beneath thick-rimmed glasses. "Miss Blake," he began, his voice low and measured, "I trust your journey was uneventful." Eleanor nodded curtly. "The mansion is quite something." He smiled faintly, but there was a shadow behind his eyes. "Indeed, it carries the weight of many years. And, if I may be frank, some peculiar stories." "Peculiar stories," Eleanor echoed, arching an eyebrow. "The family has always been complicated," he said, glancing toward the grand staircase. "Your great-aunt Lillian was a woman of strong will and many secrets." Eleanor's pulse quickened. She had heard the name before, whispered in old family tales as a figure shrouded in mystery. Secrets? What kind of secrets? Mr. Hargrove hesitated, then shook his head. "I'm afraid I'm bound by discretion, but I would advise caution as you settle in." Before Eleanor could press further, a soft voice interrupted. "Miss Blake, I have your room ready." Mrs. Whitlock appeared from the shadows, the housekeeper's austere presence grounding the moment. She was a sturdy woman, her eyes sharp but kind, her uniform tidy despite the weariness etched into her face. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitlock," Eleanor replied, following her down a dimly lit corridor lined with faded portraits and peeling wallpaper. The housekeeper's footsteps were steady, her voice a quiet murmur. "This place has seen better days, but it holds many memories. You must be patient with it." Eleanor nodded, her skepticism mingling with a growing fascination. As she settled into the modest guest chamber, she found herself drawn to the window overlooking the overgrown gardens. The branches swayed in the chill wind, casting eerie patterns on the cracked glass. That night, as the mansion creaked and groaned beneath the weight of history, Eleanor sat by the flickering candlelight, pen poised over her journal. The house seemed to breathe around her, whispering secrets she was determined to uncover. The legacy she had inherited was more than bricks and mortar, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. With a deep breath, she began to write. unaware that this first step would lead her into a labyrinth of lost letters, hidden identities, and family secrets that would change her life forever. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of a century-old mystery, beckoning Eleanor to listen closely. Eleanor Blake stood in the shadowed hallway of the Victorian mansion, the echo of her footsteps swallowed by the vast emptiness that surrounded her. The air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of aged wood lingered in every corner. She had spent the better part of the afternoon wandering from room to room, each space frozen in time, draped in sheets and silence. Yet it was the attic door, tucked away behind a faded tapestry near the grand staircase, that now held her full attention. The door itself was a formidable barrier-solid oak with iron hinges darkened by age and neglect. A small brass keyhole glinted faintly beneath the grime, teasing Eleanor with the promise of secrets just beyond reach. She had found the key earlier that day, tucked inside an old bureau drawer in the master bedroom, its cool metal heavy in her palm. Now, standing before the door, she fumbled with the key, her fingers trembling slightly despite her usual composure. "Come on," she muttered to herself, finally coaxing the key into the lock. The mechanism resisted stubbornly, groaning like a reluctant beast before yielding with a soft click. Eleanor took a deep breath, bracing herself for what lay beyond. Pushing the door open released a long-forgotten chill that swept through the corridor. The attic was cloaked in shadows, the only light filtering through a narrow, grimy window high on the far wall. Dust motes danced in the fragile shafts of sunlight, settling over piles of forgotten belongings and the skeletal frames of broken furniture. The air smelled musty, tinged with the unmistakable aroma of old paper and wood slowly giving way to time. Eleanor stepped inside cautiously, her boots stirring up a soft carpet of dust that whispered beneath her feet. Her eyes scanned the cramped space, taking in the clutter. Battered trunks bound with cracked leather, stacks of yellowed books, and scattered bundles of newspapers. It was a treasure trove of the past, a hidden chamber frozen in a moment long gone. Drawn to one particular trunk, Eleanor knelt beside it, her fingers tracing the brittle leather straps. They snapped softly under her touch, the sound echoing in the stillness. With care, she lifted the heavy lid, revealing a trove of carefully preserved items. Bundles of letters tied with faded ribbons, sepia-toned photographs curling at the edges, and brittle documents whose ink had begun to fade. Her heart quickened. These were the whispers of lives once lived, fragments of stories waiting to be unearthed. She untied a bundle of letters, the paper crackling as she unfolded the fragile sheets. The handwriting was elegant, looping and precise, penned in ink that had mellowed to a soft brown. Eleanor's eyes scanned the opening lines, catching names and dates that hinted at a complicated family history. As she delved deeper into the letters, a faint sound interrupted the creak of the attic floorboards behind her. Eleanor spun around, the beam of her flashlight slicing through the darkness. The attic was empty, but a sudden gust rattled the window pane, scattering a few loose papers to the floor. She stooped quickly, gathering them before they could be lost forever. The discovery sent a shiver down her spine, not from the cold, but from the undeniable sense that these letters were the first thread in a tangled web of secrets. Eleanor straightened, the weight of the moment settling over her. This mansion, with its peeling wallpaper and forgotten corners, was far more than a relic of the past. It was a keeper of stories, some perhaps better left buried. Yet Eleanor was no stranger to stories, especially ones that refused to stay hidden. As a journalist, she thrived on uncovering truth, no matter how deeply it was concealed. With a resolute breath, she gathered the letters and photographs, already planning her next move. The attic door, once a barrier, had now opened a gateway, and Eleanor Blake intended to step through it fully, no matter where the path might lead. She paused at the threshold, glancing back once more into the shadowed room. The mansion seemed to hold its breath, waiting, and Eleanor knew this was only the beginning. With the letters clutched in her hands and a spark of determination in her eyes, she descended the narrow staircase, ready to confront whatever secrets the past had left behind. Outside, the fading light of day cast long shadows across the estate, as if the mansion itself was drawing a veil over the mysteries hidden within its walls. But Eleanor Blake was undeterred. Every letter was a clue, every photograph a key, and she was ready to unlock the truth, one page at a time. As the night settled in, a storm quietly brewed on the horizon, promising that the journey ahead would be as turbulent as it was revealing. Eleanor could only wonder what storm lay within the forgotten words of those letters, where shadows would rise to meet her in the days to come. And so, with a heart both heavy and hopeful, Eleanor prepared to delve deeper into the secrets of the mansion, unaware that the attic's discovery was the first step in a mystery that would challenge everything she believed. The attic was silent, except for the faint rustling of paper as Eleanor Blake carefully unfolded the first of the old letters. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the grimy window panes, casting dusty beams that danced across the wooden floorboards and illuminated the fragile yellowed pages she held. Each letter was tied with a faded blue ribbon, brittle with age, but inside, the carefully penned words were remarkably preserved. Eleanor's eyes scanned the elegant handwriting, the loops and flourishes of ink revealing the touch of a practiced hand. The letters were from a woman named Lillian Worthington. Her tone in the earliest correspondence was warm, even tender, addressing her brother with gentle affection. Eleanor felt a strange connection to the voice from the past. There was a vulnerability hidden beneath the formal language, a sense of longing and unresolved pain. As she progressed through the letters, however, the mood shifted. The once affectionate words grew colder, more guarded, and a palpable tension began to seep through the lines. Lillian wrote of family disputes, whispered rumors, and a scandal that had fractured relationships within the Worthington household. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly as she read a passage hinting at betrayal, a betrayal so profound that it threatened to unravel the family's reputation and legacy. The letters spoke of secrets kept in dark corners, of whispered accusations behind closed doors, and of a sorrow that lingered like a shadow over the grand estate. A sudden creak from the floor startled Eleanor. She looked up sharply, her heart quickening. The vast emptiness of the attic seemed to close in around her, the dim light flickering as the shadows deepened. She reminded herself that the mansion was old and that sounds like this were to be expected, yet the chill that ran down her spine was undeniable. The house was alive with its own stories, and Eleanor was beginning to understand that some of them were more than mere echoes of the past. Returning to the letters, Eleanor found one that was different. It was written in a hurried, almost frantic hand, the ink blotched in places as though the writer's emotions had spilled onto the page. This letter alluded to a family secret, something so dangerous that it had to be hidden away. The words were vague, but suggestive references to a scandal involving a death, a betrayal, and a silence that must be maintained at all costs. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, the weight of the discovery settling on her shoulders. The skeptical journalist within her wrestled with the temptation to dismiss these as mere family drama, but the raw emotion in Lillian's voice was undeniable. This was more than gossip. It was a cry for truth from beyond the grave. Determined to uncover the full story, Eleanor gathered the letters and tucked them carefully into her satchel. She knew this was only the beginning. The mansion held its secrets tightly, but with each letter she read, the veil began to lift. Somewhere within these fragile pages lay the truth of what had shattered the Worthington family so many years ago. A truth Eleanor was now resolved to reveal, no matter the cost. The evening shadows lengthened as Eleanor descended the attic stairs, her mind alive with questions, her resolve hardening. The mansion was no longer just an inheritance. It was a mystery waiting to be solved, and she would be the one to unravel it. With a last glance back at the attic door, Eleanor whispered to herself, "The truth is in these letters, and I will find it." Her journey had truly begun. The attic was colder than Eleanor had expected, despite the late spring evening. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the thin candlelight flickering against the cracked wooden beams and casting long, wavering shadows on the faded wallpaper. The trunk she had pried open earlier tonight lay open beside her, spilling its fragile contents, yellowed letters, brittle photographs, and a scattering of old newspaper clippings. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded another letter, its ink faded but still legible. Lillian's words were careful, yet filled with an urgency that made Eleanor pause. The letter spoke of strained family bonds, whispered secrets, and a name that did not belong, an alias used to mask a dangerous truth. Eleanor's mind raced. The mention of a hidden identity was unexpected and unsettling. Why had no one mentioned this before? And what kind of secret would compel a family member to erase their own name? The house creaked around her, its wooden bones settling with a groan that echoed eerily through the empty rooms below. Eleanor's breath caught when a sudden draft swept through the attic, causing the candle to flicker wildly. She glanced toward the small window, its glass cracked and streaked with grime, and shivered despite the shawl. As she turned back to the letters, a faint sound reached her ears, soft creaking, like a floorboard shifting somewhere down the long hallway outside. Eleanor froze, straining to listen. The silence returned almost immediately, but the seed of unease had been planted. She wasn't alone in this house, or, if she was, the house itself seemed alive with restless memories. Tucking the letter carefully into her satchel, Eleanor descended the attic stairs slowly, her footsteps muffled against the threadbare carpet. At the end of the hall, the frosted glass of the study door shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Something moved behind it, a shadow slipping just out of clear view. Eleanor's heart pounded fiercely as she reached the door, hands trembling as she pressed an ear against the cold glass. No sound came, just the whispering wind outside and her own ragged breath. She pulled back, her skepticism wavering. The mansion was no longer just a relic of a forgotten past. It was a living enigma, its walls steeped in secrets that demanded to be uncovered. The letters hinted at a murder, one that had never been resolved, and Eleanor could no longer dismiss the strange happenings as mere coincidence or the house settling after years of neglect. Back in the parlor, Eleanor lit the fireplace, the crackling flames casting a warm glow that pushed back the shadows but did little to calm her racing thoughts. She spread the letters across the polished mahogany table, eyes scanning the elegant script. One letter stood out, a confession written in a hand that seemed deliberately disguised, the words trembling with fear and desperation. It spoke of betrayal, hidden identities, and a murder that had been carefully concealed beneath layers of lies. The storm outside began to build, rain tapping insistently against the windows, the wind howling through the eaves like a mournful chorus. Eleanor felt the weight of the mansion's history pressing down on her, a silent challenge to uncover the truth buried in its darkest corners. She reached for her notebook and began to write, piecing together the fragmented story from the letters. The mystery was no longer just an academic curiosity. It was a puzzle she was determined to solve, even if it meant confronting shadows both literal and figurative. As midnight approached, Eleanor stood by the window, staring out into the garden shrouded in mist. The house groaned around her, and for a moment she thought she heard a whisper carried on the wind. The past was calling, and Eleanor knew she had taken her first step into a story that would change everything. But who had hidden behind the veil of secrecy, and why? That question haunted her as she blew out the candle and prepared to face whatever truths the coming days would bring. The late afternoon sun dipped low behind the dense trees surrounding the Victorian mansion, casting long shadows over the cracked stone path leading to the grand entrance. Eleanor Blake stood by the oak door, her gloved fingers tracing the intricate carvings as a sudden sound broke the silence, the clip-clop of hooves on gravel. She turned sharply, eyes narrowing through the swirling mist that had begun to creep in with the evening chill. A solitary carriage emerged from the fog, its black paint dulled by years of neglect but still gleaming faintly under the dying light. The driver pulled the reins, bringing the horse to a slow halt. With a polite nod, he lifted his worn hat and climbed down, vanishing almost immediately into the shadows of the overgrown garden. Eleanor's heart beat a little faster. Visitors were rare in this forgotten place, especially unannounced ones. The carriage window rolled down with a soft creak, and a man's voice, smooth and measured, called out, "Miss Blake." She stepped forward, her boots clicking on the stone steps as the carriage door opened. A figure emerged, tall, lean, and impeccably dressed, despite the evident age of his clothing. His eyes, a piercing shade of grey, seemed to appraise the mansion with a familiarity that unsettled Eleanor. "I am Ambrose Sinclair," he said, tipping his weathered felt hat. "I believe we have much to discuss about your new home." Eleanor's brows knitted in cautious surprise. "I wasn't expecting company. How did you find me?" Mr. Sinclair smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth turning up with a hint of knowing. "The history of this mansion is not so easily forgotten, Miss Blake. Some of us have been keeping watch." Reluctantly, Eleanor stepped aside to let him in. The heavy door groaned shut behind them, sealing the outside world away. Inside, the mansion's vast drawing room was cloaked in shadows, the last rays of sunlight filtering through stained glass windows and casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the worn Persian rugs. Mr. Sinclair surveyed the room with an almost reverential air. "It still holds its secrets," he murmured, "though some have been buried far too long." Eleanor motioned to a pair of high-backed chairs by the fireplace. "If you're here to share those secrets, I'm listening. But be warned, I'm not easily convinced by ghost stories." He chuckled softly, settling into a chair. "Good. Skepticism is a valuable trait. But facts, Miss Blake, facts are what I bring." The fire crackled, sending flickering light across their faces as Mr. Sinclair began to recount tales of the mansion's former inhabitants. Stories intertwined with whispers of betrayal, lost love, and a murder that had shaken the family to its core a century ago. Eleanor listened intently, her journalist's instincts sharpening. His knowledge was unsettlingly precise, revealing intimate details she had not uncovered in any of her research. How could a stranger know so much? Her mind raced with questions, suspicion warring with intrigue. As the evening deepened, the conversation grew more charged. Eleanor pressed him for names, dates, motives, but Mr. Sinclair remained elusive, offering hints rather than outright answers. "The truth," he said, "is often best uncovered piece by piece." Just as the clock chimed 10, A sudden knock echoed through the hall. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Mr. Sinclair's eyes flicked to the door, a shadow crossing his features. But before she could react, he rose smoothly, donning his hat. "I must take my leave," he said, voice low but resolute. "There is much to consider, and time is not on our side." Eleanor accompanied him to the door, the night air cold and heavy with mist. As Mr. Sinclair's silhouette retreated down the path, swallowed by the fog, she felt the mansion itself seem to exhale, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment. Left alone, Eleanor stood rooted on the threshold, her thoughts a turbulent storm. The visitor had opened a new chapter in her investigation, one that promised answers but also danger. Who was Ambrose Sinclair, and what role did he play in the century-old mystery she was determined to solve? With a renewed sense of purpose, Eleanor closed the door behind her, the lock clicking into place as the night deepened around the ancient walls. The game had changed, and she was ready to play. The heavy silence of the mansion seemed to deepen around Eleanor as she stood in the grand library, her eyes scanning the towering shelves lined with dusty tomes. The afternoon sun filtered feebly through stained glass, casting muted hues over the neglected room. She had spent hours here already, piecing together the fragments of the estate's history, yet a nagging sense of incompleteness tugged at her. Something was hidden, something just beyond reach. Her fingers brushed absent-mindedly along the spines of books until they halted at a particular shelf that felt different. The wood was colder, the grain finer. She pressed her palm against it, the surface giving slightly beneath her touch. With a tentative push, the shelf creaked and shifted, pivoting slowly to reveal a narrow, dark passageway beyond. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. A secret door concealed behind the books. How had she missed this? The air that escaped was thick with the scent of age and secrets long kept. Lighting a candle she had brought with her, Eleanor stepped cautiously into the passage. The walls were lined with cracked plaster and faded wallpaper, remnants of a time when this clandestine corridor had been traversed regularly. Cobwebs brushed against her cheeks as she moved forward, the floorboards creaking underfoot. At the passage's end, a door small and unassuming stood ajar. Pushing it open, Eleanor entered a cramped room bathed in shadows. The faint glow of her candle revealed a cluttered space, a wooden desk piled with yellowed letters, photographs curled at the edges, and trinkets that seemed to whisper stories of lives once lived here in secret. She picked up a letter, the ink faded but still legible. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, betraying the anxiety of the writer. As Eleanor read, the voices of the past began to emerge, tales of love and betrayal, whispered threats and silent sacrifices. Each envelope she opened seemed to pull her deeper into the mansion's tangled history. A sudden noise behind her, a distant creak, made her start. The house was old, she reminded herself, settling her racing heart. But the thought lingered. Was she truly alone in discovering this hidden chamber? The discovery of the secret passage and room was more than a mere curiosity. It was a key turning point. The letters hinted at family members who had been erased from official histories, identities hidden beneath layers of deception. Eleanor realized that the mansion was not just a relic of Victorian grandeur, but a vault of secrets waiting to be unearthed. She spent hours cataloging the contents, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on her shoulders. Each letter was a piece of a larger puzzle, one that might finally illuminate the shadowy murder that had haunted the estate for over a century. As dusk fell outside, Eleanor closed the secret door behind her, the candle flame flickering in the growing darkness. she knew this was only the beginning. The mansion's walls held their breath, and so did she, ready to confront whatever truths lay ahead. With a final glance back at the hidden room, Eleanor stepped into the corridor, the mystery deepening with every step she took. The attic's secrets were beginning to unfold, and with them, the story of a family's past, complicated, tragic, and waiting to be told. She paused at the threshold of the library once more, the question echoing in her mind: who had hidden this passage, and why? The mansion was no longer just a building to be restored. It was a story to be uncovered, and Eleanor was its reluctant chronicler. As the shadows lengthened, a newfound resolve settled within her. The past would speak, and she would listen. And so, with the secret passage behind her and the letters clutched tightly in her hands, Eleanor Blake stepped forward, ready to delve deeper into the enigma of the Victorian mansion and the century-old murder concealed within its walls. But unknown to her, eyes watched from the shadows beyond the garden, and not all who sought the truth wished for it to be found. End of. The candle flickered, casting long shadows across the aged paper that Eleanor held delicately in her hands. The attic was silent, save for the faint creak of the mansion settling and the occasional rustle of the brittle letters as she turned them one by one. Among the faded ink and looping Victorian script, the voice of Lillian echoed through time, revealing a secret that had been buried for decades. Eleanor's eyes scanned a particular letter, its margins smudged with tears, or perhaps the passage of countless years. "My dearest James," it began, "though the world would condemn us, I cannot deny the fire you have ignited in my soul. Our love must remain hidden, a fragile thread in the tapestry of this cursed family. But I fear betrayal is closer than I dare admit." Eleanor's heart quickened. Here was a woman trapped by societal expectations and family honor, confessing to a love forbidden and fraught with danger. The letters revealed the clandestine meetings between Lillian and James Harrow, the family's servant, a man whose loyalty was as enigmatic as the shadows that danced on the mansion's walls. The room seemed to close in around Eleanor as she imagined the whispered conversations beneath moonlight, the stolen glances across the garden maze, and the quiet desperation of two souls yearning against the tide of convention. She rose and walked to the attic window, peering out into the darkened estate where the garden lay in silhouette. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and fading roses, a stark contrast to the warmth of the glowing hearth in the room below. Turning back to the letters, Eleanor found a passage hinting at a betrayal that shattered the fragile bond. Lillian's words were laced with pain and accusation, naming no one directly, but leaving a trail of suspicion that tangled the family tree in knots. Eleanor's mind raced. Could this betrayal have sparked the violent event that haunted the mansion's history? Motivated by a sudden urgency, she spread the letters across the attic floor, grouping them by date and sender. The fragile documents whispered of love, fear, and deceit, painting a portrait of a family fractured beneath the surface of respectability. Eleanor traced the connections with a pencil, sketching out relationships that twisted like the ivy climbing the mansion walls. Her fingers trembled as she uncovered a letter from Margaret Blake, her late aunt, written in a stark, no-nonsense hand. It spoke of suspicions, warnings, and a plea for discretion. The tone was different from Lillian's poetic lamentations. It was pragmatic and edged with fear. Eleanor realized that the scandal had permeated the household, involving not just the lovers, but those who sought to protect or exploit the fragile peace. As the night deepened, Eleanor's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise, a soft thud from below, like footsteps or a shutter closing. She paused, listening intently, her skepticism wavering under the mansion's eerie spell. The past was no longer distant. It was breathing around her, urging her to unravel the truth. Determined, Eleanor made her way down to the main hall, the floorboards creaking beneath her boots. Her mind pieced together fragments of the letters and the shadows they cast on the present. The forbidden romance was no mere footnote. It was the fulcrum upon which the family's darkest secret balanced. In the drawing room, Eleanor found an old portrait of Lillian and James, faded and cracked, but unmistakably intimate in its depiction. Their eyes seemed to hold secrets, their smiles tinged with sorrow and defiance. Eleanor studied the painting, a silent witness to a love that had defied time and, perhaps, reason. Back in the attic, she resumed her reading, uncovering hints of meetings in the garden, labyrinth, whispered arguments, and a final, desperate letter where Lillian wrote of a plan to escape the mansion and the shadows that stalked her. Eleanor's breath caught. Had someone betrayed that plan? Was the murder an act of jealousy, revenge, or fear? The mansion itself seemed to respond, the wind rattling the window panes and the house settling with a mournful groan. Eleanor's investigation had taken a crucial turn. The letters were no longer mere relics, but keys to unlocking a secret that had festered in silence for a century. She paused to gather the scattered letters once more, her hands steady despite the storm of emotions within her. The truth was close, tangled in the echoes of the past, waiting for her to bring it to light. Eleanor knew that the coming days would test her resolve, but the mystery of Lillian and James had ignited a fire within her, one she could not extinguish until the final secret was unveiled. With a last glance at the flickering candle, Eleanor whispered to the shadows, "I will find the truth, no matter where it hides." And with that vow, the attic fell silent once more, cradling its secrets until the dawn. The dusk had settled into a deeper shade of blue by the time Eleanor Blake decided to take a solitary walk through the garden. The estate, sprawling and neglected, held its breath beneath the moonlight, shadows pooling beneath twisted hedges and ancient oaks. Eleanor's footsteps were muffled by the soft earth, and the cool night air brushed against her face, carrying the faint scent of damp leaves and forgotten blooms. She had come here seeking solace, a brief respite from the mounting pressure of her discoveries within the mansion's walls. But solace was not what she found. As she traced the gravel path winding past the overgrown rose bushes, a flicker of movement caught her eye just beyond the gnarled branches of a hawthorn tree. Her breath caught in her throat. There, barely discernible in the moonlight, was a shadow, shifting silently near the garden's edge. Eleanor froze, her heart pounding in the hush of the night. Who could be here at such an hour? The mansion was miles from the nearest village, and she had not heard the rumble of a carriage or the crunch of tires on the gravel drive. The figure did not move closer, merely lingered, as if waiting or watching. Eleanor's instincts, honed by years as a journalist, chasing stories, urged caution but also curiosity. She crept closer, stepping lightly, her eyes straining to pierce the darkness. The garden around her was alive with subtle sounds. The rustle of leaves whispered secrets as the wind teased the branches overhead. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted a lonely, mournful sound that seemed to echo the mansion's own haunted past. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the leather-bound notebook she carried, a talisman of sorts as she ventured deeper into the unknown. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the garden, stirring the ivy that clung to the mansion's ancient stone walls. The shadow flitted away, dissolving into the darkness like smoke on the breeze. Eleanor exhaled sharply, a mix of frustration and adrenaline flooding through her. She had been so close to uncovering the identity of this mysterious watcher. Yet now they had vanished, leaving only questions in their wake. She stood there for a moment longer, eyes searching the gloom for any trace, any clue. But the garden was silent again, save for the soft sigh of the night air. With a deep breath, Eleanor turned back toward the house, the weight of the encounter settling heavily upon her shoulders. Inside, the mansion seemed colder, the shadows longer and more insistent. In the dim light of her study, the flickering fire cast dancing silhouettes upon the walls, ghostly echoes of the secrets she was unraveling. Eleanor sat down at the heavy oak desk, her mind racing. She uncapped her pen and began to write, her hand moving swiftly across the pages as she recounted the evening's events. This shadow in the garden was no mere figment of her imagination. It was a tangible sign that the past was not yet done with this place, that the family secrets she sought to uncover were guarded jealously by unseen eyes. With every word, Eleanor's resolve hardened. She would not be deterred by threats or shadows. The truth was here, buried beneath layers of dust and deception, and she was determined to bring it into the light even if it meant confronting the darkness itself. As the fire waned and the mansion settled into silence, Eleanor's thoughts lingered on the figure in the garden. Who were they, friend or foe, protector or predator? The night held its secrets close, but Eleanor knew one thing for certain: the game had changed. From this moment on, she would watch as closely as she was watched, and she would be ready. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of a forgotten name, a promise of revelations yet to come. Eleanor closed her notebook, her eyes fixed on the window where the garden lay cloaked in shadow. The mystery deepened, and the night was far from over. The small reading room of the town's historical archives smelled of aged paper and dust, a scent Eleanor found both comforting and invigorating. She had taken a seat at the largest table, its surface scarred from decades of use, and spread out the carefully preserved letters she had found in the attic alongside a collection of old ledgers, newspapers, and parish records Mr. Jameson had kindly gathered for her. The green-shaded lamp overhead cast a warm pool of light, illuminating the delicate handwriting of the century-old correspondences. Eleanor adjusted her glasses and leaned closer, the scratch of her pen breaking the silence as she jotted notes. Each letter, penned by Lillian, revealed glimpses of a life shadowed by tension and secrets. But Eleanor was determined to see beyond the subjective voice of these personal accounts. She needed facts, corroboration, something to anchor the swirling suspicions in undeniable truth. "You'll find, Miss Blake," Mr. Jameson's voice interrupted softly, "that the official records sometimes tell a very different story than personal letters." He lifted a fragile, leather-bound parish register, his fingers trembling slightly with age. Eleanor watched as he carefully turned the brittle pages. "See here," he said, pointing to an entry dated 2 years after one of Lillian's letters described a family tragedy. "The records show no mention of a death or scandal at the mansion during this time. Yet, the letter you brought alleges a grievous betrayal." Eleanor frowned, her mind racing. Could the letters be exaggerations, or perhaps attempts to conceal other truths? "Precisely," Mr. Jameson nodded. "There's often a motive to rewrite history, especially in families with influence and property to protect." The revelations stirred a new energy in Eleanor. The family story was more tangled than she'd imagined, layered with deliberate omissions and possible deceit. Later that afternoon, she returned to the mansion, the weight of the documents heavy in her satchel. In the kitchen, Mrs. Cartwright was preparing tea, the familiar aroma mingling with the distant ticking of the old grandfather clock. Eleanor laid out her findings. Mrs. Cartwright, the records don't align with the letters. There are gaps, contradictions. What do you make of that? The housekeeper's hands paused in their work, her eyes narrowing slightly. Sometimes, Miss Blake, what's written in the books isn't what truly happened. People have their reasons for hiding things. Eleanor met her gaze, sensing a wall behind those words. A warning, perhaps. Do you know more than you're letting on? Mrs. Cartwright sighed, the lines on her face deepening. This house has held secrets for a long time. Not all of them are safe to uncover. That night, Eleanor stood at the attic window, the fading light of dusk casting long, eerie shadows over the estate's sprawling grounds. The cold air whispered through the cracked glass, carrying with it the rustle of leaves and distant calls of night birds. Her thoughts churned restlessly. The discrepancies she had uncovered meant someone had carefully controlled the narrative of this family's past. But who and why? Her journalist instincts flared. This was no longer a mere curiosity. It was a puzzle demanding to be solved. But as the shadows deepened, so did the sense of foreboding. Some truths, Eleanor realized, came with dangers she had yet to face. Determined, despite the rising unease, she resolved to follow the threads wherever they led, even if it meant confronting those who wanted the attic's secrets to remain buried forever. The creak of floorboards outside the attic door startled her, and she turned sharply, heart pounding. In this house of whispers and shadows, Eleanor knew one thing with certainty: the past was not done with her yet. And neither was the mansion. The heavy wooden door groaned as it swung inward, releasing a draft that carried with it the faint scent of rain and earth. Eleanor stood near the grand staircase, her eyes scanning the figures entering the mansion's expansive foyer. One by one, they crossed the threshold, some with hesitation, others with a confident stride that suggested a claim to the legacy this house represented. First was Margaret Sinclair, Eleanor's distant cousin. She moved with the elegance of someone accustomed to drawing rooms and silver spoons, her dark hair streaked with strands of dignified grey. Her sharp gaze swept the room quickly, noting the peeling wallpaper and the layer of dust on the grand chandelier. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she took in the state of the mansion. "It's not quite the picture I had in mind," Margaret said softly, almost to herself, yet loud enough for Eleanor to hear. Behind her came Charles Hargrove, a burly man with a booming voice that filled the space far more than his presence deserved. His worn tweed jacket seemed at odds with the opulence the mansion once held. "Well, I'd say this old place has seen better days," he remarked, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth as he looked around. "But there's value here, you can bet on it." Eleanor's brother, Simon, arrived shortly after, his casual demeanor a stark contrast to the formality of the others. Sandy-haired and with an expression that betrayed his skepticism. He offered Eleanor a supportive nod as he took in the surroundings. Last to enter was Beatrice Finch, an elderly aunt with a quiet presence that somehow commanded attention. Her delicate hands clutched a brooch shaped like a Kia family heirloom Eleanor had only seen in photographs. Beatrice's sharp eyes took in every detail, from the cracked banister to the faded portraits lining the hall. "So, this is it," Eleanor said, breaking the silence as she stepped forward, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "Our family home." The group moved into the drawing room, its once lavish decor now a faded echo of grandeur. Eleanor gestured toward the fireplace, the hearth cold and emptied of logs. "I've started looking through some of the letters I found in the attic. There's more to this house, more than just dust and cobwebs." Margaret settled into an armchair, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "The past has a way of lingering," she said, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of warning. Charles scoffed. Ghost stories won't pay the bills. We need to think about what's valuable here and who's going to get what. The tension in the room thickened like the fog that often rolled across the estate grounds. Eleanor knew the investigation she had begun was no longer hers alone. The arrival of these relatives introduced a new layer of complexity. Each person carried their own motives, their own secrets. Later that evening, Eleanor found herself alone with Beatrice. The older woman produced an old photograph, its edges worn and yellowed with age. It showed several family members gathered on the mansion's grand steps, their faces a mixture of smiles and guarded expressions. "This house has seen much," Beatrice whispered, her voice fragile but resolute. "Some truths are buried deeply, but they have a way of surfacing when least expected." Eleanor's fingers traced the image, feeling the weight of history pressing down. "Do you think any of us are ready for what lies beneath?" Beatrice's eyes held a glint of something unreadable. "Readiness is a luxury. Curiosity and courage are what carry us through." As night embraced the mansion, Eleanor sat by the flickering fireplace. The crackle of flames filled the quiet room, shadows dancing on the walls like specters of the past. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the unrest within her. Her thoughts drifted to the letters, the secrets, and the faces that now shared this space with her. The family reunion was not just a gathering. It was a collision of histories and hidden agendas. Eleanor knew that to uncover the truth, she would have to navigate these treacherous waters carefully. Who among them could be trusted? And who might be hiding something far darker than mere family rivalry? The answers lay somewhere within the walls of the mansion and the tangled web of relationships that now surrounded her. But Eleanor was determined. For the story, for the truth, and for the legacy of the house. She would see this mystery to its end of them, if it meant confronting shadows that refused to fade. And so, the night deepened, with secrets poised to unravel and alliances waiting to be tested. As Eleanor prepared to face whatever the family reunion might bring. The heavy oak door creaked open as Eleanor stepped once again into the mansion's drawing room, the air thick with the scent of aged wood and lingering memories. Today she had invited the family members who had arrived in recent days to share their stories about the mansion's past. The hope was to untangle the web of secrets that the letters had begun to reveal. Margaret Sinclair was already seated by the grand fireplace, her silver-streaked hair pinned meticulously, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Charles Bramwell loomed near the window, arms crossed, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Agnes Whitmore, the eccentric aunt, shuffled in last, her colourful shawl trailing behind her like a living tapestry. "Thank you all for coming," Eleanor began, setting down her notebook. "I believe that understanding the past is essential for uncovering the truth. Each of you has a connection to this place, and I would like to hear your memories and stories about the mansion and our family." Margaret was the first to speak, her voice calm yet tinged with a hint of pride. "This house has always been a symbol of our family's legacy. I recall my grandmother telling me about the grand balls held here, the laughter echoing through the halls, and the strength of our ancestors who built this estate." Charles scoffed lightly. "Romanticized tales, Margaret. The truth is darker. There were disputes over inheritance, bitter rivalries. I have documents that prove mismanagement and secrets that some would rather forget." His tone was sharp, almost accusing. Agnes settled into her armchair near the fire, her eyes twinkling mischievously. "Oh, you two are far too serious. This mansion has seen love and betrayal, secrets whispered in the dead of night. I remember hearing stories of a forbidden romance, a betrayal so deep it tore the family apart. The spirits of those days still linger here, you know. Eleanor listened intently, scribbling notes as the voices overlapped, each story contradicting the last. Margaret spoke of honor and tradition. Charles painted a picture of greed and deception. Agnes wove tales that danced between fact and folklore. The mansion seemed to breathe with the tension in the room. As the discussion grew heated, Eleanor noticed subtle exchanges between Charles and Margaret, a sideways glance here, a tightened jaw there. It was clear that beneath the surface, old wounds festered and loyalties were divided. Determined to find clarity, Eleanor proposed they examine the old records together. The group gathered around the large mahogany table, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows that danced over yellowed papers and faded photographs. Margaret pointed out a ledger. Here, this entry shows a large sum missing during the estate's final years before it changed hands. It was hushed up at the time. Charles leaned in. That confirms my suspicions. Someone wanted to cover their tracks. Agnes muttered, money and power have always been the root of the family's troubles. But there's much more that's never been spoken. Eleanor's heart pounded. The conflicting accounts only deepened the mystery, but they also illuminated the fractures that had long splintered the family. She realized that to uncover the truth, she would need to navigate these turbulent waters carefully, discerning fact from fiction, trust from deceit. The meeting ended with no clear resolution, but Eleanor was left with a sharper sense of the obstacles ahead. Outside, the wind howled through the gnarled trees surrounding the mansion, as if echoing the unrest within its walls. As Eleanor closed her notebook, a quiet determination settled over her. The mansion's history was a puzzle of conflicting stories, but somewhere within the tangled web of memories and lies lay the key to the century-old murder. She was resolved to find it, even if it meant confronting the very family she had just begun to understand. But as the candle flickered out, Eleanor wondered which version of the past was true, and who would be willing to protect their secrets at any cost. The answers, she knew, would not come easily. The night deepened, and so did the shadows surrounding the mansion's legacy, ready to reveal their truths or consume those who dared to seek them. The afternoon sun filtered weakly through the stained glass of the mansion's study, casting fractured colors onto the worn pages of the ledger Eleanor held open on her lap. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of aged parchment. Harold Whitcomb leaned forward, his fingers steepled beneath his chin as he regarded the brittle document with a scholar's reverence. This ledger, Harold began, his voice low and deliberate, is one of the few surviving records of the Blake family's possessions, catalogue of valuables dating back to the late 1800s. It is here that the first mention of the brooch appears. Eleanor's eyes traced the faded ink that listed items with meticulous detail. There it was, the Whitcomb sapphire brooch, priceless, family heirloom. The entry was dated a mere week before the murder that had shadowed the family for generations. A sapphire brooch, Eleanor murmured, lifting her gaze to meet Harold's. Why does this matter? Harold's expression darkened. Because, Eleanor, it vanished the night of the murder. No one has ever found it since. Some believe its disappearance is the key to understanding what truly happened that dreadful night. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the ledger. The weight of history suddenly felt tangible, pressing against her chest like the mansion's oppressive atmosphere. Determined to learn more, Eleanor sought out Mrs. Agnes Porter, the mansion's longtime housekeeper, in the dim servants' quarters, where the sunlight was scant and the scent of mothballs mingled with aged wood. Mrs. Porter shared hushed tales passed between the household staff. The brooch was more than just a jewel, Mrs. Porter whispered, her eyes darting nervously. It was a symbol of status and power. When it disappeared, so did the peace of this house. Eleanor listened intently as Mrs. Porter recounted rumors of secret exchanges and veiled threats, a tapestry woven from whispers and half-truths. Later, as Eleanor examined the letters she had found in the attic, a vivid scene materialized in her mind. A storm raged outside, lightning illuminating a room thick with tension. Voices rose in interrogations, hurled like daggers over the glittering sapphire brooch that caught the flickering candlelight, its facets a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Eleanor's heart pounded as she read between the lines, piecing together a story of betrayal and greed, where the loss of the heirloom was not merely an unfortunate coincidence but a catalyst for violence. Standing alone in the grand hallway, Eleanor's gaze swept over the ornate woodwork and faded portraits that lined the walls. The echoes of footsteps, real or imagined, stirred the stillness around her. The mansion seemed to breathe its secrets, and Eleanor felt the weight of her discovery settle upon her. The missing heirloom was no longer just a lost jewel. It was a key one that might unlock the truth behind a century-old murder. With renewed resolve, Eleanor prepared to delve deeper, knowing that each step forward risked stirring shadows best left undisturbed. But the truth, she reminded herself, was worth any danger. The brooch was missing, but the story it left behind was waiting to be uncovered, piece by painful piece. As evening fell, the mansion seemed to hold its breath, the secrets of the past entwined with the fate of the present. Eleanor's investigation was no longer just a pursuit of facts, it was a journey into the heart of a family's darkest hour, with the lost heirloom gleaming like a beacon amid the shadows. And somewhere within the walls, the answers awaited. The heavy oak doors of the drawing room creaked shut behind Eleanor as she stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of aged wood and faint traces of lavender from a long-forgotten sachet. The dim candlelight wavered in the low light, casting shifting shadows that danced along the ornate wallpaper, as if the very walls themselves were alive with secrets. Around her, the assembled family members murmured uneasily, their polite veneer cracking under the weight of unspoken truths. Eleanor's gaze settled firmly on Margaret Hawthorne, who sat with a poised grace that belied the tension in her tightly clasped hands. "Margaret," Eleanor began, her voice steady but edged with quiet challenge. "You've been wonderfully forthcoming about the family's history, but there are still gaps, particularly about the lost heirloom. Can you explain why such an important piece would simply vanish without a trace?" Margaret's eyes flickered briefly, a shadow passing over her composed expression. "The heirloom's disappearance has been a painful mystery for decades," she replied smoothly, "and I assure you, I have no desire to conceal anything." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yet you declined to answer my earlier letters on this matter. And Charles, as the family lawyer, surely you have records that could shed light on this." The room shifted uncomfortably as Charles Everett adjusted his glasses. "My duty is to protect the family's interests," he said cautiously. "Some matters are better left undisturbed." "But what if those matters are precisely what we need to uncover?" Eleanor pressed, stepping forward. "If the murder and the missing heirloom are connected, then silence only serves to protect the guilty." A sharp clink startled everyone as a teacup slipped from an unsteady hand and shattered against the marble hearth. The sudden noise broke the fragile calm, and murmurs swelled into whispered accusations. Simon Blake, standing near the doorway, observed quietly. His eyes narrowed as he caught a fleeting glance exchanged between Margaret and a shadowed figure in the corner, a look heavy with implication. The alliances within this family were shifting, fragile and dangerous. Outside, the first raindrops began to tap against the window panes, the soft pattering growing into a steady rhythm. It was as if the storm outside echoed the turmoil within the walls of the mansion. Eleanor's heart raced with a mixture of fear and resolve. This was no longer just a quest for answers. It was a dangerous game where every word could provoke a misstep, every revelation could bring retribution, but she was determined. No matter the cost, she would uncover the full truth buried beneath decades of silence and deceit. As the rain intensified, so did the tension in the room. Eleanor's voice cut through the rising storm. I will not be deterred. The past will speak, whether you wish it to or not. The family members exchanged uneasy glances, the fragile mask of civility fracturing. In that moment, Eleanor knew the path ahead would be fraught with peril, but also that the secrets of the mansion were finally beginning to surface. This dangerous game had only just begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. The heavy oak door creaked softly as Eleanor stepped into the mansion's grand library, a room she had come to regard as the heart of the sprawling estate. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and polished wood, comforting aroma that belied the dark secrets she was uncovering. On the desk lay a small, dust-covered box that had not been opened since the previous occupant's disappearance. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the lid, revealing a stack of fragile letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Among them, an unassuming, yellowed envelope caught her eye. It was sealed with a deep, red wax emblem crest she recognized from earlier letters, but had never before seen in such pristine condition. Carefully, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter within. The ink was faded yet legible, and the handwriting was elegant but hurried, the lines wavering as though penned in emotional turmoil. The letter began with a quiet declaration of guilt and a detailed account of a crime long whispered about but never spoken aloud, a murder that had shattered the family a century ago. The author confessed to the deed, describing the motive, the exact moment, and the aftermath with chilling clarity. Eleanor's breath caught as she read. This could be the smoking gun she had sought, the key to unraveling the mystery that had haunted the mansion for generations. Yet, as she reread the letter, subtle inconsistencies troubled her phrases that seemed out of place for the time period. Anachronistic word choices, and a tone that felt rehearsed rather than raw. Could this truly be a confession, or was it a clever forgery designed to manipulate whoever found it? Determined to find answers, Eleanor sought out Mr. Alistair Crane, the enigmatic visitor who had appeared just days prior, claiming intimate knowledge of the mansion's history. She found him in the parlor, seated near the tall windows as rain traced silver rivulets down the glass. The storm outside cast a somber mood over the room, the flickering candlelight battling the shadows that clung to the corners. Holding the letter between them, Eleanor watched his eyes closely. "What do you make of this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the knot of suspicion tightening in her chest. Alistair took the letter, his fingers brushing the fragile paper with reverence. He murmured, "The contents are compelling, but I have my doubts. The handwriting does not match known samples from the family archives, nor does the tone align with the character of the supposed author. So it could be a plant." Eleanor pressed. "Possibly," he said, his gaze distant. "Or perhaps an attempt to shift blame, to rewrite history in favor of someone long gone." Before Eleanor could respond, the soft sound of footsteps approached. Mrs. Agnes Porter, the housekeeper and guardian of the mansion's secrets, entered quietly, her face etched with a mixture of concern and weariness. "Miss Blake," she began gently, "I must urge caution. There are things about this family about that night that are better left undisturbed. Not all truths are kind, and some letters are meant to deceive." Eleanor nodded, feeling the weight of the warning but unwilling to turn away. "I need to know, Mrs. Porter. I need the truth." That evening, with the rain still tapping its relentless rhythm against the windows, Eleanor returned to the library. The fire crackled in the hearth, its warm light a stark contrast to the cold dread settling in her bones. She spread the letter alongside others she had collected, cross-referencing details and timelines. Each revelation brought her closer to the heart of the mystery, but also deeper into a web of deceit and half-truths. As the night deepened, Eleanor's resolve hardened. Whoever had penned that letter, whether guilty, innocent, or manipulative, had ignited a fire that would not be easily extinguished. The mansion's shadows grew longer, and the past whispered louder than ever. She was bound now, not just by inheritance, but by a promise to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Yet, as she closed the letter and looked out into the darkened grounds, a chilling thought took root. What if the confession was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a far more dangerous game? The candle flickered once more, casting a fleeting shadow across the page, as Eleanor prepared herself for the trials still to come. The atmosphere in the Victorian mansion had grown palpably tense. Eleanor Blake, her journalistic instincts sharpened by weeks of painstaking investigation, had reached a critical juncture. The letters, the whispered stories, the veiled glances, they all pointed to fractures beneath the surface of the family's polished facade. That evening, in the drawing room warmed by the flickering firelight, Eleanor met with Samuel Hartley, the enigmatic relative whose knowledge of the mansion's past had proved invaluable. "Samuel," Eleanor began, her voice low but steady, "these letters imply more than just old grievances. There's betrayal here hidden, carefully guarded, but who stands to gain from this silence?" Her fingers traced the edges of a yellowed envelope. The ink faded, yet the words still sharp. Samuel leaned closer, his piercing blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "I've seen enough to know that not everyone here is as they seem. Margaret, for one, guards her secrets like a fortress. Yet Thomas's nervousness suggests he too carries burdens he'd rather bury." Their whispered conversation was interrupted by the distant clatter of silverware from the dining hall. Eleanor and Samuel exchanged a knowing glance before moving toward the source of the tension. There, Margaret Sinclair stood, her cold gaze fixed on Thomas Redford. "You think your silence shields you," she accused, her voice slicing through the air. "I know about your dealings, Thomas. You've been less than honest with us all." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, his stocky frame tense. "I'm only trying to protect what's left of this family," he retorted, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. The confrontation left Eleanor unsettled. Back in the solitude of the attic, moonlight filtering through the dusty window, she unfolded a letter that had somehow eluded her scrutiny until now. The words revealed a betrayal from decades past, one that redefined the narrative she had been piecing together. The weight of the revelation settled heavily on her chest, a mixture of shock and sorrow washing over her. Outside, a sudden thunderstorm erupted, the rumble of thunder mirroring the turmoil within the mansion's walls. Eleanor and Samuel exchanged wary glances, understanding that the fragile alliances they had formed might soon be tested beyond repair. Trust was a rare commodity here, and betrayal lurked in every shadow. As Eleanor closed the letter, a steely resolve took hold. The path ahead was fraught with danger. But uncovering the truth meant navigating the treacherous waters of family loyalty and deception. Her investigation had become more than a search for answers. It was a battle to distinguish friend from foe in a house built on secrets. With the storm raging outside, Eleanor prepared herself for the challenges to come, knowing that each revelation brought her closer to the heart of the century-old murder and to the darkest corners of the family's past. The afternoon sun had long dipped below the horizon by the time Eleanor Blake found herself once more at the heart of the mansion's mysteries. Her fingers traced the spines of the dusty tomes lining the vast library wall, eyes scanning for any sign of a hidden mechanism. The mansion, with its endless corridors and creaking floorboards, felt alive, watchful, almost as if it guarded its secrets jealously. The hush of silence was punctuated only by the occasional groan of aged timber settling into the night. "There must be something here," Eleanor murmured, her voice steady yet low. She stepped back, considering the bookshelf before her. It was an imposing structure, stretching from floor to ceiling, laden with leather-bound volumes and yellowed manuscripts. Her gaze fixed on a slight irregularity, faint outline in the woodwork, a seam too precise for mere chance. "You never told me you were a locksmith," came a gruff voice from behind. Startled, Eleanor turned to see Horace Finch, the mansion's caretaker, his weathered face illuminated by the flickering glow of a lantern. "I'm not," she replied with a faint smile, "but I know a thing or two about hidden compartments. Sometimes you just have to push, pull, or pry." She stepped forward, pressing her palm flat against the wood. A soft click echoed in the stillness as the shelf shuddered, swinging inward on hidden hinges to reveal a narrow passageway cloaked in darkness. "By the heavens," Horace muttered, peering inside. "I never knew this was here." The air that greeted them was stale and heavy, laced with the scent of mildew and forgotten years. Eleanor lit a candle, its flame trembling as she stepped cautiously into the passage. The narrow corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper and thick cobwebs. Each step stirred a cloud of dust, particles dancing in the candlelight like restless spirits. At the corridor's end, a heavy wooden door barred their path. Eleanor's breath caught as she reached out, tracing the intricate carvings obscured beneath layers of grime. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open, its hinges groaning in protest. The room beyond was small, claustrophobic, and suffused with an oppressive silence. Inside lay the remnants of a past shrouded in darkness. A faded bloodstain marred the floorboards, its edges irregular and disturbing. A shattered mirror lay in fragments, reflecting shards of candlelight like fractured memories. Against one wall stood a locked chest, its iron clasp ornate and unyielding. Horace cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "This place, it's where they hid it all, isn't it?" Eleanor nodded, her eyes scanning the scattered papers strewn across a rickety desk. She picked up a leather-bound diary, its cover cracked and brittle. The pages inside were filled with hurried scrawls, confessions, names, and dates that sent a chill down her spine. "It's all here," she whispered. "Everything they tried to bury." As they sifted through the evidence, the mansion seemed to close in around them. Suddenly, a faint creak echoed from the floor above. Eleanor's heart thudded painfully against her ribs. "Did you hear that?" she asked, voice barely audible. Horace's eyes narrowed. "We're not alone down here." They gathered the documents swiftly, the weight of the secrets pressing heavily upon them. The discovery of the secret room and the damning evidence within was a turning point. No longer was the murder an enigma confined to old letters and whispered rumors. It had manifested into tangible truth, ripe with danger and deception. Eleanor's mind raced. Who else could know about this hidden chamber? Was the creak merely the house settling, or a warning from a shadowy observer? The stakes of her investigation had escalated, entangling her ever deeper in a web of family secrets and peril. The candle flickered once more, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts along the peeling wallpaper. Eleanor closed the diary with a resolute snap. "We have to be more careful now," she said firmly. "This changes everything." Outside the secret room, the mansion held its breath, waiting for the next move in a game that had begun more than a century ago was far from over. The air inside the mansion hung heavy with the scent of old paper and wax as Eleanor spread the collection of letters, torn photographs, and faded documents across the expansive oak dining table. The dim candlelight flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper and the worn surface beneath her fingertips. Each letter was a whisper from the past, an echo of secrets long buried beneath layers of time and silence. Eleanor's eyes, sharp and scrutinizing, traced the looping script of Lillian's words, the anguish and bitterness barely concealed between the lines. As the night deepened, Eleanor's mind raced, piecing together fragments of information that painted a complex portrait of a family fractured by concealed emotions, greed, jealousy, and revenge motives that seemed all too human, wove an intricate tapestry behind the facade of respectability. It was no longer just a story of inheritance and mystery. It was a story of passion and betrayal that had festered in the shadows of the Victorian mansion. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of the library door. Charles Wentworth entered, his presence as imposing as ever. Clad in his usual impeccably tailored suit, his cold eyes flickered over the scattered documents before settling on Eleanor. The tension in the room was palpable, like a taut wire ready to snap. "Miss Blake," Charles began, his voice smooth but edged with something harder. "I trust your investigation is proving fruitful." Eleanor met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "Fruitful enough to see that the past is not as neat as it appears, Mr. Wentworth," his lips pressed into a thin line. "Some truths are better left buried." The muffled ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to mark the seconds as the two circled each other verbally, each weighing the other's words for hidden meaning. Later that evening, Eleanor found herself across from Margaret Ashcroft by the fireplace. The matriarch's silver-streaked hair shimmered in the firelight, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a worn handkerchief. Her voice, though steady, was laced with sorrow and bitterness as she recounted the grievances that had torn the family apart. "They were blinded by ambition," Margaret whispered, eyes misting over. "Promises broken, trust shattered. It was never just about money." The crackling flames seemed to echo the emotional heat of her confession, illuminating the raw pain beneath the veneer of dignity. The next day, Eleanor met with Thomas Reed, the family historian, in the mansion's overgrown garden. Twilight swirled around them, the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine mingling in the cool evening air. They walked slowly along the gravel path, exchanging observations and piecing together the final threads of the mystery. "The letters reveal more than just the facts," Thomas mused. "They expose the emotional undercurrents, the jealousy, the resentment that drove one to murder." Eleanor nodded, her gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. Understanding the motive is the key to unmasking the killer. It's the heart of the matter. As they stood beneath the slowly darkening sky, Eleanor felt a surge of determination. The tangled web of family secrets was beginning to unravel, and with each revelation, she came closer to exposing the truth hidden for over a century. But with the stakes rising and loyalties shifting, she knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger and that the next steps she took would be critical in bringing justice to the shadows of the past. The mansion seemed to whisper around her, its walls steeped in history and secrets waiting to be uncovered. Eleanor glanced once more at the letters spread before her, the inked words a testament to lost lives and unspoken truths. The journey was far from over. The wind howled fiercely outside the Victorian mansion, the rain battering the ancient window panes like a relentless drumbeat. Inside, the drawing room flickered with candlelight, shadows dancing across the ornate wallpaper and polished wood. Eleanor Blake sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, her sharp eyes sweeping over the assembled family members. The storm had been brewing all afternoon, but now it seemed an apt accompaniment to the tempest she was about to unleash. "I've called us here because the silence has become unbearable," Eleanor began, her voice steady despite the knot of tension tightening in her chest. "We can no longer pretend the past is buried, nor that the truths hidden away won't come to light." Margaret Whitmore shifted uneasily in her seat, her fingers twisting a delicate handkerchief. Thomas Blake's jaw clenched, eyes darting between Eleanor and Henry Caldwell, the enigmatic stranger whose presence still unsettled the room. Henry stood near the fireplace, his tall figure silhouetted against the flickering flames, a calm yet somber expression etched on his face. "You speak as though you know everything," Thomas snapped, breaking the fragile silence. "But what proof do you have that any of this matters? That any of our secrets are worth dredging up now?" Eleanor met his glare with unwavering resolve. "Because the letters, the hidden rooms, the shadows in the garden, they all point to a truth that has been kept from us for too long, and it's time we faced it." A sudden crash of thunder punctuated her words, the storm outside echoing the rising storm within the room. The family members exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of unspoken memories pressing down on them. Margaret finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I've kept hidden. A letter I destroyed years ago. It implicated someone we all loved, and I thought protecting that secret would spare us pain. But perhaps it only deepened it." Eleanor leaned forward, sensing the breakthrough. "What letter? What did it say?" Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as she recounted the confession she had concealed, a revelation that shifted the entire narrative of the murder. Henry stepped forward then, his calm demeanor faltering as he revealed his own connection, one that tied him irrevocably to the victim and to the night that changed everything. The room grew heavy with the weight of these disclosures. Eleanor felt the storm's fury mirrored in the charged atmosphere. Each revelation a bolt of lightning illuminating the dark corners of a century-old mystery. As the night deepened, voices rose and fell, confessions spilling forth like the rain flooding the grounds outside. The family's fractured past was laid bare, jealousy, betrayal, and long-buried resentments intertwined in a web far more complex than Eleanor had imagined. Yet amid the chaos, a clearer picture emerged. The murder was no longer a shadowy enigma, but a puzzle whose pieces were beginning to fit together. Eleanor's journalist instincts sharpened. Every whispered admission, every tear-streaked apology was a clue. But the night was far from over. The storm outside showed no sign of abating, and Eleanor knew the revelations made tonight would have consequences she had yet to foresee. Trust was fragile, and the mansion's walls seemed to listen, holding secrets still waiting to be uncovered. As the clock chimed midnight, Eleanor looked around at those gathered, weary, vulnerable, and forever changed by the night's confessions. She understood then that the journey into the mansion's past was only just beginning. "We must keep going," Eleanor said softly, her voice steady despite the tempest. "The truth is within our grasp. but it will demand courage and honesty from all of us. Outside, lightning split the sky, a brilliant flash illuminating the foreboding silhouette of the Victorian mansion, a house alive with secrets, and tonight, a house where the past had finally begun to speak. The night of revelations had arrived, and with it, a promise that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning air was thick with a cold dampness as Eleanor Blake ascended the narrow staircase to the secret room once more. The mansion, cloaked in the stillness of dawn, creaked under the weight of its own history. She had returned to the hidden chamber with a determined purpose to revisit the last letter she had discovered, one that promised to unravel the tangled web of the century-old murder. Pushing open the heavy door, the faint scent of aged paper and polished wood greeted her. Her eyes darted immediately to the desk where she had placed the letter the night before, but the envelope was gone. An unsettling void sat in its place, the surface eerily bare. Eleanor's heart quickened, disbelief clawing at her chest. She crouched, scanning the floor for any thinner scrap of paper. A dropped seal, a telltale footprint, nothing. The disappearance was deliberate. Someone had stolen the letter. The weight of suspicion hung heavily in the air as Eleanor closed the door behind her. She knew the significance of what was missing. That letter was the key to unlocking secrets long buried, a confession or revelation that could finally illuminate the dark corners of the family's past. Now, the path seemed shrouded in deeper mystery. Back in the drawing room, the atmosphere was charged. Eleanor gathered the relatives and household staff, her voice steady but edged with urgency. "The letter I found in the secret room, it's gone, missing." Gasps and murmurs spread among the assembled faces. Charles Merrick's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering with a shadow of something unreadable. Margaret Hale's lips pressed into a thin line, while James Thornton, the housekeeper, shifted uneasily. "Who would do such a thing?" Eleanor demanded, scanning the room. "Who here has something to hide?" The flickering flames of the fireplace cast long shadows that seemed to dance with the tension in the room. Charles cleared his throat, his voice measured. "Accusations without proof serve no one. We must remain calm and rational." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Of course, but we cannot ignore the fact that trust is eroding within these walls. This theft suggests someone fears what the letter contains." Later that afternoon, Eleanor found herself walking the garden paths with Margaret Hale. The scent of damp earth and blooming night flowers enveloped them as the sun slipped behind heavy clouds. Margaret's voice was low, filled with quiet concern. "Eleanor, I've lived near the mansion for years. There are things people would rather keep buried. If the letter is missing, it means the past is not done with us yet." Eleanor looked to Margaret, drawing strength from her gentle presence. "I need allies, Margaret. This house holds more secrets than I imagined, and I can't unravel them alone." Margaret nodded, her eyes reflecting the dimming light. "You have mine, but tread carefully. Some truths come at a cost." Across the mansion, Charles Merrick sat alone in his study. The soft glow of a desk lamp flickered over his lined face as he stared at empty hands. The silence was thick, oppressive. He clenched his fists, battling the guilt that gnawed at him. The letter's disappearance was his doing, or at least, it felt that way. He had taken it in a moment of desperation, fearing the damage its contents could wreak upon the family's fragile facade. As night fell, Eleanor stood before the fireplace, the flickering flames mirroring the turmoil within her. The vanishing letter was more than a lost piece of paper. It was a challenge, a threat that the mansion's shadows were not yet ready to surrender their secrets. She resolved to dig deeper, to confront the fractures of trust and expose the truth, no matter the cost. The game had changed. The past was fighting back, and Eleanor was caught in its relentless grip. Who had taken the letter, and why? The answers lay hidden in whispered lies and veiled glances, waiting for the light of discovery. But with each step forward, Eleanor knew the dangers multiplied. The mansion's secrets were alivened. Someone was determined to keep them that way. As she prepared for what was to come, Eleanor felt a chill trace her spine. The silence of the house was no longer just empty space. It was charged with watchful eyes and quiet threats. The vanished letter was a warning, a signal that the shadows still held power, and the truth might yet slip through her fingers. Determined and wary, Eleanor set her resolve. Tomorrow, the search would continue, but tonight, the house whispered its secrets only to those brave enough to listen them. Eleanor was listening closely, ready to uncover whatever darkness lay ahead. The night was thick with silence, save for the occasional creak of aged wood settling within the mansion's vast bones. Eleanor sat by the fireplace in the drawing room. The warm glow from the flames flickering across the yellowed papers spread before her. Each letter bore names and dates that painted a tangled web. But the more she read, the more the threads seemed to fray rather than connect. The script of Lillian, of others long gone, hinted at betrayals and hidden truths, but never delivered a clear answer. She tapped a pen against her lips, eyes narrowing as she tried to reconcile the conflicting accounts. Some letters spoke of innocence, others whispered accusations. The words danced in her mind, refusing to settle into a coherent story. It was as if each writer had their own version of the past, each hiding something behind carefully chosen phrases. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Agnes Whitmore entered, her presence as formidable as the mansion's stone walls. "Miss Blake," she said, voice steady but laced with warning. "Some histories are best left undisturbed." Eleanor met her gaze with equal firmness. "I'm not here to preserve illusions, Mrs. Whitmore. I want the truth." Agnes's eyes narrowed, a shadow crossing her features. "Truth has a price. Are you prepared to pay it?" The room felt charged. Eleanor could almost hear the unspoken threats weaving between them. Agnes was protective, perhaps, too protective of the family's secrets, but whether from loyalty or fear, Eleanor couldn't tell. Later, Eleanor found herself wandering the garden under the moon's pale light. The cool air was sharp against her skin, and the rustling leaves whispered like ghostly confidants. The isolation gnawed at her, feeding the suspicions that no one here was entirely honest. Every shadow seemed to hold a watcher, every silence a withheld secret. Back inside, a meeting with Miles Hartley in the cramped library offered both hope and frustration. His knowledge of the family's history was invaluable, yet his own motives were cloaked in mystery. They argued over interpretations, his calm logic clashing with her journalistic instincts. Was he a trustworthy ally or another piece in the puzzle? "We must proceed carefully," Miles urged, voice low. "The past is not just a story to be told, it's a minefield." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Then we'll just have to navigate it together." But as the night deepened, so did her doubts. Each conversation, each discovery, seemed to raise more questions than answers. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, yet she needed allies if she hoped to unravel the century-old murder. Her journal lay open on the table, a reminder of her purpose. The letters, the shadows, the whispered warnings, they all demanded to be understood. And Eleanor resolved that no matter how deep the suspicion, she would follow the truth wherever it led, even if it meant standing alone against the darkness. The clock chimed midnight, its echo a solemn call to arms. The game was far from over, and Eleanor knew that the next move could change everything. The evening had settled into a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire in the grand hearth of the drawing room. Eleanor Blake sat hunched over a fragile yellowed letter, the edges fraying like the tangled threads of the mystery she was unraveling. Her eyes flicked over the cursive handwriting of Lillian, a voice from the past that whispered of betrayal and sorrow. The mansion around her groaned softly under the weight of time, shadows pooling in the corners as if eager to swallow the light whole. A sudden, sharp knock shattered the quiet, startling Eleanor so much that a breath escaped her lips in a small gasp. The sound echoed eerily through the vast hallway beyond. She rose cautiously, her heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and unease. With deliberate steps, she crossed the creaking floorboards and opened the heavy front door a crack. No one stood in the moonlit porch, only the chill wind that swept through the overgrown garden. But as she peered into the darkness, a folded note fluttered at her feet. Bending down, Eleanor picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded the paper. The message was brief, chilling in its simplicity. Leave now or suffer the consequences. A shiver ran down her spine, but she folded the note with a steady hand and locked the door behind her. This was no longer a game of uncovering dusty family secrets. It was a warning. Someone wanted her to stop. That night, sleep evaded her. The mansion's creaks and groans seemed louder, more threatening. Just as dawn began to pale the sky, a slow, deliberate knock came from the library door. Eleanor opened it to find a tall figure cloaked in shadow. The man's dark coat brushed the floor, his hat pulled low over his brow. His voice was a low hiss as he spoke. "You're meddling in things better left forgotten. Leave this place, Miss Blake, before it's too late." Eleanor met his gaze, cold and unflinching. "I inherited this house, its history, and its secrets. I intend to see it through." The man's eyes glittered with something unreadable. Then he nodded once and vanished down the hallway. Eleanor closed the door, her pulse quickened but her resolve unbroken. Later, in the kitchen, Mrs. Cartwright, the housekeeper, approached with a worried expression. "Miss Blake, I've lived in this house my whole life," she said quietly, "and I've seen what happens when some truths come to light. Be careful." Eleanor appreciated the concern, but knew the path ahead was fraught with peril. Yet, the lure of truth and justice was too compelling to abandon. Standing by the attic window, she gazed out into the mansion's sprawling gardens, now swallowed by night. The moon cast silver shadows on the twisted branches and creeping ivy. Somewhere in that darkness lurked the answers and the threats. But Eleanor's heart steeled itself. She would not be driven away by fear. The story was far from over. If anything, the danger only confirmed she was on the right path. And as the first light of dawn crept through the dusty panes, Eleanor Blake prepared to face whatever awaited her in the shadows of the past. The study was shrouded in the soft glow of candlelight, the only illumination coming from the flickering flame that cast long shadows across the worn oak desk. Eleanor Blake leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she spread out the collection of letters before her. Each parchment, yellowed with age and delicate to the touch, was a fragment of a story long buried beneath layers of time and silence. Her fingers traced the faded ink, the cursive script speaking of secrets and sorrow. But it was the subtle irregularities in the handwriting that caught her attention. For hours, she compared the letters, aligning dates with events and cross-referencing the names mentioned. The mansion's creaks and groans seemed to quiet around her, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to uncover what had been hidden for so long. Eleanor's journalistic instincts buzzed with the thrill of discovery. She was no longer just an inheritor of a dilapidated estate, but an investigator unraveling a tangled family web. Her breakthrough came unexpectedly. Among the letters penned by Lillian Hawthorne, a woman whose life had been overshadowed by tragedy, Eleanor noticed an odd sequence of letters that didn't fit the flow of the narrative, a cipher embedded within the text. Pulling out her notebook, Eleanor began to decode the message, each symbol revealing a word, each word a clue. The cipher spoke of a child, a secret kept from the world, a lineage erased from the family records. The revelation sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. This was no mere scandal. It was a hidden identity that could explain the motives behind the century-old murder that had haunted the mansion's halls. The very foundation of what she thought she knew about the Hawthorne family was crumbling. Eager to confirm the cipher's implication, Eleanor ventured into the attic, the air thick with dust and memories. The narrow beam of her flashlight danced across forgotten trunks and cobwebbed corners until it landed on a small, locked box tucked away beneath a pile of old coats. The lock gave way with a satisfying click, revealing a faded portrait of a childer boy with striking features that bore a resemblance to none of the known family members. As Eleanor held the portrait, a flood of questions overwhelmed her. Who was this child? How had he been concealed for so long? And most importantly, what role did he play in the dark history of the mansion? That evening, the storm outside mirrored the turmoil within. Lightning flashed, illuminating the parlor where Eleanor faced Mr. Ambrose Gale, the mysterious man whose knowledge of the mansion's past had both intrigued and unnerved her. Their conversation crackled with tension, words sharp as the thunder outside. Ambrose revealed fragments of truths long suppressed, confirming Eleanor's suspicions about the family's hidden sins. The room felt charged, the weight of unspoken secrets pressing down on them both. Eleanor's resolve hardened. She would not rest until every piece of the puzzle was laid bare. Back in the study, by the soft glow of the lamplight, Eleanor began to write. Her pen moved swiftly across the paper as she documented the discovery of the secret heir, the cipher's message, and the implications for the murder case. The task was daunting, but beneath the fatigue was a fierce determination. The truth was within reach, and she was ready to claim it. As the night deepened, Eleanor paused, her gaze drifting to the window where the first light of dawn threatened the darkness. The shadows that had haunted the mansion were beginning to recede, but new mysteries had taken their place. The hidden identity was a key, but it also raised new questions that would lead her deeper into the labyrinth of family secrets. With a steady breath, Eleanor sealed her letter, the story far from over. The century-old murder was no longer just a cold case. It was a living mystery, and she was determined to see it through to the end. The mansion held its secrets close, but Eleanor Blake was ready to unearth them all. The dim glow of the candle flickered across the worn pages of the diary, its fragile script revealing truths long buried beneath layers of dust and silence. Eleanor Blake's eyes traced the words with growing intensity, each sentence unraveling the tightly wound threads of the Ashcroft family's dark past. The room was silent except for the soft scratching of her pen as she jotted notes. The atmosphere charged with a mixture of dread and anticipation. It had taken weeks of painstaking research, late nights poring over letters, and countless confrontations with reluctant relatives, but here, finally, was the key to the century-old mystery. The diary belonged to Lillian Ashcroft, A woman whose voice had only whispered to Eleanor through faded ink and fragile paper until now. The entries detailed a forbidden love, a bitter betrayal, and a secret identity concealed beneath layers of deceit. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she reached the passage that explained the murder the catalyst for a family feud that had reverberated through generations. Lillian wrote of a clandestine affair that threatened to destroy reputations and fortunes, and of a desperate act committed in the shadowed halls of the mansion. The murderer was someone no one had suspected, a figure hidden in plain sight, motivated by jealousy and the ruthless desire to protect a carefully crafted facade. As the candle guttered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, Eleanor heard footsteps approaching. Henry Carlyle entered the room, his expression grave yet tinged with a reluctant relief. "You've found it," he said quietly, his voice breaking the silence like a confession. "Yes," Eleanor replied, meeting his gaze. "This changes everything. The letters only hinted at the truth, but this diary, it confirms the motives, the identities, the sorrow that poisoned this family." Her voice was steady, but inside, a storm of emotions, rage, vindication, sorrow, and a fierce determination to see justice done, even if only in the court of history. Henry nodded, stepping closer to the firelight. "It's time the truth saw the light. The past cannot be changed, but it can be understood." Together, they pieced together the final fragments of the story, each revelation more harrowing than the last. The diary revealed that the murder was born not merely of passion, but of desperation to protect a secret that, if exposed, would have shattered the family's standing and legacy. The identity of the victim and perpetrator, long obscured by lies and silence, now lay bare. Eleanor's investigative instincts sharpened as she considered the implications. This secret, once unveiled, would ripple through the family reunion, challenging loyalties and forcing reckonings. She prepared to face the difficult conversations ahead, aware that the fragile peace of the mansion rested on the edge of a knife. As dawn crept through the stained glass windows, Eleanor penned a letter to herself, a promise to honor the truth and preserve the memory of those silenced by time. The family secret was no longer a shadow lurking in the attic. It was a story demanding to be told. With the mystery finally unfolding before her eyes, Eleanor felt a profound shift within, a blend of sorrow for the past and hope for the future. The mansion, with all its hidden rooms and whispered secrets, had given up one of its darkest tales, and Eleanor was ready to carry its weight. Yet, even as the first light of morning filled the room, a lingering question haunted her. What other secrets remained locked away, waiting for the right moment to emerge? The answers would come, but for now, the family secret was laid bare. A testament to the enduring power of truth and the shadows it could dispel. Eleanor closed the diary gently, the echo of Lillian's words still resonating within her. The story was far from over, but the foundation had been set. The mansion held its breath, as did she, poised on the cusp of revelation and resolution. Outside, the wind whispered through the ancient trees, carrying with it the promise of change and the first stirrings of justice long overdue. The night was thick with an uneasy quiet as Eleanor Blake returned to the secret room, the flickering candle in her hand casting long, wavering shadows against the faded wallpaper. Her mind replayed the fragments of the letters she had pored over for weeks, each revealing the fractured lives and hidden grudges of the Fairfax family. Yet none had prepared her for what she was about to uncover. The antique desk, ornate and heavy with the dust of decades, beckoned with a promise of closure. Eleanor's fingers traced the intricate carvings, searching for any sign of another hidden compartment. Her heart quickened when her touch found a faint seam beneath the desktop's edge. Kneeling, She produced a small, slender screwdriver from her bag and carefully eased the panel open. Inside lay a folded letter, its parchment yellowed and brittle, sealed with a red wax stamp bearing the Fairfax crest. With a deep breath, Eleanor broke the seal and unfolded the letter, careful not to damage its fragile edges. The handwriting was elegant yet hurried, the ink faded but legible. It was from Lillian Fairfax, the woman whose voice had haunted the pages of so many letters, revealing her anguish and desperation. Eleanor's eyes scanned the opening lines, the cadence of Lillian's sorrowful words pulling her deeper into the past. To whoever finds this, the letter began, "Know that these words are my last testament, the truth I could never speak aloud. The shadows that have loomed over our family are darker than you imagine, and the sins of one have stained us all." Eleanor's voice faltered as she read aloud, the room seeming to shrink around her. Lillian recounted the events leading up to the murder night of betrayal, whispered threats, and a fatal act born from jealousy and fear. The letter painted a complex portrait of Henry Fairfax, once revered as the patriarch, now revealed as a man consumed by his own demons and dark secrets. Margaret Fairfax, his wife, appeared not as a mere victim of circumstance, but as a figure of quiet strength, caught in the crossfire of ambition and love. The letter's narrative wove through the tangled relationships of the family, exposing long-hidden motives, a clandestine affair, the desperate hope of inheritance, and a secret identity long concealed. Eleanor's pulse quickened as Lillian named the murderer someone she had never suspected, whose facade of innocence had masked a calculating and ruthless nature. A sudden draft swept through the room, rustling the curtains and scattering loose papers across the floor. Eleanor paused, the letter trembling in her hands, the weight of the revelation pressing down upon her. The shadows on the walls seemed to shift, as if the house itself was breathing in anticipation. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath, and resolved to face the truth head-on. The final lines of the letter were a plea for justice and remembrance, urging the uncovering of the full story so that the past might finally rest. Eleanor folded the letter carefully and placed it in her notebook, her mind racing with the implications. This was no longer a mere mystery. To solve it was a reckoning with the very soul of the Fairfax legacy. As dawn began to creep through the tall windows, Eleanor sat back, the letter still warm in her hands. The mansion, once a silent sentinel of secrets, now held a story ready to be told, and Eleanor Blake was determined to be its voice. The discovery of the final letter marked a turning point. It was the key that unlocked the full narrative, a story of love and betrayal, of darkness concealed beneath a veneer of respectability. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and difficult choices, but Eleanor's resolve was unshaken. The truth, long buried in the attic's dust and shadows, was finally within reach, and with it, the promise of justice and closure for a family haunted by its own past. The heavy oak door creaked open, and Eleanor stepped into the drawing room where Charles Whitmore awaited. The room was cloaked in the muted glow of evening, shadows flickering against the wallpaper like restless spirits. Her fingers tightened around the bundle of yellowed letters, fragile threads of a past long concealed, but now unraveling. Charles' eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto hers as he took a measured step forward, his polished leather shoes echoing on the hardwood floor. "Mr. Whitmore," Eleanor began, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling within her. "We've both been dancing around the truth for far too long. These letters," she gestured to the papers in her hands, "tell a story of betrayal, deceit, and ultimately, murder." Charles' lips pressed into a thin line, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "You have no proof, Eleanor," he said coolly, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his confidence. The distant rumble of thunder punctuated the room's silence, rain rattling against the tall windows like a drumbeat of impending reckoning. Eleanor spread the letters across the antique desk, pointing to passages that spoke of secret meetings, hidden identities, and veiled threats. "Here," she said, voice rising with conviction, "you threatened to silence anyone who stood in your way. The night of the murder, your alibi was conveniently vague, and these letters," she tapped one gently, "were penned by Lillian herself, hinting at a truth she was too afraid to reveal." Charles' posture stiffened, his jaw clenched as if holding back a storm of his own. For a moment, the room was thick with the weight of unspoken words. Then his shoulders sagged, and a shadow crossed his face. "You don't understand," he whispered, the cold mask slipping away to reveal a man haunted by his past. "Help me understand," Eleanor urged softly, stepping closer, her investigative resolve tempered with compassion. "Why did it have to come to this?" He closed his eyes briefly, as if summoning the courage to speak. "It was never meant to be a murder," Charles confessed, voice laden with regret. "We were protecting the family, but things spiraled out of control." Eleanor listened intently as he recounted the tangled web of jealousy, greed, and fear that had culminated in tragedy. The confession was not just an admission of guilt, but a key unlocking decades of silence. As the storm outside finally began to wane, a profound stillness settled over the room. Eleanor felt the weight of history lift slightly, replaced by a cautious hope that truth, no matter how painful, could bring healing. Yet, as Charles' words hung in the air, Eleanor knew this was but one chapter in a larger story, where shadows still lingered and secrets awaited their unveiling. The confrontation had cracked the surface, but beneath lay deeper mysteries, beckoning her relentless pursuit. With a steadying breath, Eleanor gathered the letters once more, her mind racing ahead to the challenges that awaited. The mansion, its walls echoing with long-buried voices, seemed to watch her with newfound expectation. The journey toward justice was far from over, but for the first time, the path forward was clear. "Thank you, Charles," Eleanor said quietly, "for your honesty. Now, together, we can finally bring the truth to light." Outside, the last drops of rain fell, and a tentative dawn began to break, promising a new day for the mansion, its secrets, and those who called it home. The muted glow of the fireplace flickered against the worn spines of the books lining the library walls, casting elongated shadows that danced in rhythm with Eleanor Blake's quickened heartbeat. The air was thick with anticipation as she stood opposite Charles Whitmore, the man whose stoic facade had begun to crack under the weight of the mounting evidence she had gathered. For months, Eleanor had painstakingly pieced together fragments of a long-forgotten past, guided by the delicate script of lost letters and the whispered echoes of a Victorian mansion's secrets. Tonight, all those threads converged into this moment of reckoning. Charles' eyes, usually so guarded, now shimmered with an unsettling vulnerability. The lines etched into his face deepened as a tremor passed through his hands. "Eleanor," he began, voiced low and weighted, "I never wished for any of this to come to light, but perhaps it was time for the truth to be told." Eleanor's gaze remained steady, her journalistic instincts urging her to listen intently. "Why, Charles? Why did it have to end in such a tragedy?" she asked softly, her voice breaking the heavy silence that had settled between them. A bitter laugh escaped him, laced with regret. It was a night clouded by despair and betrayal. "I was a younger man then, blinded by loyalty and anger. The family, the secrets, they bound me in ways I couldn't escape." As he spoke, the room seemed to shrink, the oppressive history of the mansion pressing down on them both. Charles recounted the events leading up to the murder, the clandestine meetings, the whispered threats, the unraveling trust. His confession was raw, each word a step toward absolution and self-condemnation. Eleanor noted the tremble in his voice when he described the moment the fatal act was committed, a moment born not of malice, but of desperation and fear. From the doorway, Mrs. Agnes Hargrove stood silently, her aged eyes glistening with unshed tears. The housekeeper had been a silent guardian of the mansion's memories, her loyalty unwavering yet burdened by the secrets she had guarded for decades. Watching Charles confess stirred a complex mix of sorrow and empathy within her, a witness to history finally unveiled. The room held its breath as Charles finished, the finality of his words hanging in the air like a dense fog. Eleanor felt the weight of the century-old mystery lift, replaced by a somber understanding of the human frailty beneath the facade of villainy. This confession did not merely solve a crime, it unraveled the intricate tapestry of love, jealousy, and sacrifice that had ensnared an entire family. "Thank you, Charles," Eleanor whispered, the resolve in her voice mingling with compassion. "Your truth brings us closer to healing." Outside, the wind howled against the mansion's ancient walls, but within the library, a fragile peace settled. The shadows of the past, long concealed within dusty letters and hidden rooms, had finally yielded to the light of confession. Yet, as Eleanor looked at Charles, she knew that the journey was far from over. The mansion held more stories, more secrets waiting to be uncovered, and she was its reluctant chronicler. As the fire dwindled to embers, Eleanor penned the first lines of what would become a testament to truth and redemption, a narrative that would forever bind her to the legacy of the Victorian mansion she had inherited. The confession was not an end, but a new beginning. A chapter in the enduring saga of family, identity, and the haunting power of secrets long kept in the shadows. With a final glance at Charles, Eleanor closed her notebook, her mind alive with questions yet to be answered. The mansion whispered around her, its walls alive with the echoes of the past, and she was ready to listen. The night deepened, but Eleanor's resolve burned brighter than ever. The truth was out, and with it came the promise of justice, understanding, and perhaps one day peace. The mansion was silent, save for the steady patter of rain against the tall windows of the study where Eleanor Blake sat alone. The final letter, yellowed and delicate in her hands, trembled slightly as she read and reread the confession penned over a century ago. Each word weighed heavily on her soul, a testament to the agony and guilt that had haunted the family for generations. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering candle, casting dancing shadows on the walls lined with dusty shelves and leather-bound tomes. Outside, the storm raged on, a melancholy symphony that mirrored the tumult within Eleanor's heart. She leaned back in the worn leather chair, closing her eyes briefly as a wave of exhaustion washed over her. This journey, from the day she had inherited the mansion to the harrowing revelations uncovered through faded letters and whispered secrets, had transformed her in ways she had never anticipated. What had begun as a skeptical investigation into a forgotten property became an odyssey into the depths of human frailty, love, betrayal, and the inexorable consequences of hidden truths. Her thoughts drifted to Henry Caldwell, who now sat in the grand parlor, his confession still fresh in the minds of those present. Eleanor's footsteps echoed softly as she descended the creaking staircase, the heavy wooden panels beneath her feet grounding her in the present. Entering the parlor, she found the room hushed, the air thick with a mixture of shock, relief, and sorrow. Henry, his gaunt features pale and drawn, stood with trembling hands clasped before him. His voice was barely above a whisper as he recounted the events leading to the century-old murder. Each word seemed to strip away the years of fear and silence that had cloaked the mansion. The family listened in stunned silence, some with tears glistening in their eyes, others with clenched jaws and furrowed brows. It was a moment suspended in time, the heavy burden of unspoken pain finally laid bare. Mrs. Agnes Whitmore, the family matriarch whose life had been enmeshed in the mansion's secrets, sat nearby. Her hands, frail and trembling, clutched a worn handkerchief embroidered with delicate lace. Tears streamed down her lined face, a release of decades' worth of hidden grief and remorse. She had borne witness to the slow unraveling of her family's legacy, and now, in this confessional moment, she seemed both broken and strangely liberated. Eleanor's gaze softened as she approached Mrs. Whitmore, offering a gentle smile of solidarity. The weight of the past still lingered heavily in the room, but so too did a fragile glimmer of hope. The truth, though painful, was a balm, a chance for healing and perhaps forgiveness. Later, as dawn broke over the sprawling estate, Eleanor stepped onto the veranda. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the retreating storm clouds, casting long golden shadows across the manicured gardens and the weathered stone facade of the mansion. The air was crisp and filled with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine, a reminder of life's persistent renewal. She stood silently, the cool morning breeze brushing against her face, and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey was far from over. The mansion still held its secrets, its history still whispered in every creaking floorboard and faded letter. But Eleanor felt a profound sense of purpose now, not just as an observer or chronicler of the past, but as its guardian and storyteller. Her resolve hardened. She would restore the mansion, preserve the letters, and share the story with the world. In doing so, she would honor the lives touched by tragedy and triumph alike, ensuring that the shadows of the past would not be forgotten but illuminated by the enduring power of truth. As the sun climbed higher, Eleanor turned back inside, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The resolution of the mystery was but a chapter in a much larger story, one of family, identity, and the unyielding search for meaning amidst the echoes of history. The mansion, once a symbol of neglect and suspicion, now stood as a beacon of revelation and hope, awaiting the next chapter in its long and storied existence. And Eleanor Blake, with pen in hand and heart open, was ready to write it. The air in the mansion felt different now, lighter, yet charged with a fragile tension that seemed to hum beneath the polished surfaces and restored walls. Eleanor Blake stood on the terrace as the sun dipped low, the sky painted in strokes of amber and violet, the garden bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The sprawling estate, once a place of shadows and whispered secrets, now felt like a fragile promise of new beginnings. Yet, as the evening breeze stirred the leaves and carried the faint scent of blooming jasmine, Eleanor could not shake the feeling that the past was still very much alive here, woven into the very fabric of the house and its inhabitants. Inside, the family gathered in the drawing room, a room that had witnessed generations of joy, sorrow, and betrayal. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. Margaret Sinclair sat near the fireplace, her steely eyes softened just enough to betray her cautious hope. Henry Caldwell, the family historian, shuffled through a stack of old photographs, his fingers tracing memories that were now both a balm and a burden. Clara Whitmore quietly moved about the room, her presence steady and grounding, though her face bore the shadows of the secrets she had kept for so long. Eleanor observed them all with a journalist's keen eye, recognizing the delicate dance of reconciliation and suspicion playing out before her. The murder mystery that had once seemed an insurmountable wall of silence and fear had been laid bare, the truth finally surfacing from the depths of hidden letters and whispered confessions. Yet, with truth came the weight of consequence. Family ties, once thought strong and unbreakable, now revealed their frayed edges and tangled knots. Later that evening, Eleanor found herself in the library with Margaret. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp, its golden glow casting long shadows over rows of leather-bound volumes. Here, away from the others, they shared a conversation laden with the complexity of their lineage. "We've come so far," Margaret said quietly, her voice tinged with both relief and sorrow. "But I fear the scars run deeper than any of us can see." Eleanor nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle like dust on her skin. Secrets have a way of shaping who we are, even when we try to leave them behind. Their dialogue wove through memories of betrayal, loyalty, and the fragile hope that the family might one day heal. It was a moment of connection, bittersweet and tentative. A recognition that the journey ahead would be as challenging as the path behind. In the quiet of the mansion's back hall, Clara carefully gathered the recovered letters and documents, placing them reverently into a sturdy box lined with soft cloth. Her hands trembled slightly as she locked the box, sealing away the family's darkest secrets once more. Though the mystery had been solved, the weight of those truths lingered, a solemn reminder of the past's enduring power. As the night deepened, Eleanor returned to the terrace, the cool air brushing against her face as she looked out over the estate. The mansion stood silent and imposing, its walls holding stories of love, loss, and betrayal. She breathed deeply, feeling the bittersweet ache of the journey she had undertaken. Could this family truly move forward, she wondered, when shadows of doubt and questions of loyalty still clung so tightly? The road to healing would be long and uncertain, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope, a chance to reclaim the mansion not just as a house of secrets, but as a home where truth might finally bring peace. And with that thought, Eleanor turned back inside, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that some echoes of the past would always remain, whispering in the quiet corners of the attic and the hearts of those who dared to listen. The morning sun filtered weakly through the heavy curtains of the grand foyer, casting shafts of pale light that illuminated decades of dust and neglect. Eleanor Blake stood silently, her fingers brushing along the worn wooden banister of the sweeping staircase, feeling the cold grooves beneath her palm. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten memories. For a moment, the mansion seemed to whisper to her, a faint echo of voices long past, urging her onward. After weeks of sifting through the tangled web of letters, photographs, and hidden rooms, Eleanor had come to a resolute decision. The mansion was not merely a relic to be discarded or sold off for profit, was a vessel of history, a keeper of secrets that deserved preservation. With a deep breath, she turned away from the staircase and made her way to the study, where Thomas Harper awaited her arrival. Thomas was already spread out over the large oak desk, his spectacles perched low on his nose as he examined blueprints and delicate photographs. The walls around him were lined with shelves packed with architectural journals and restoration manuals. His calm demeanor and meticulous nature were a balm to Eleanor's restless spirit. "You've given this a lot of thought," Thomas remarked without looking up, his voice low but earnest. "I have," Eleanor replied, pulling a chair beside him. "This place needs more than just superficial repairs. It needs to be brought back to life, not just for me, but for the history it holds and for those who lived and loved here before me." Thomas nodded thoughtfully, Restoring a Victorian mansion is no small task, but it's rewarding. There's so much craftsmanship here that's been lost in modern construction. We can preserve that, and perhaps even uncover more hidden stories along the way. Their conversation was punctuated by the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the occasional call of crows echoing from the sprawling estate outside. As they pored over the plans, Eleanor found herself imagining the mansion not as a crumbling relic, but as a vibrant home once again filled with light, laughter, and life. Later that afternoon, Eleanor made her way down the long hallway, where the aged portraits of her ancestors hung in solemn procession. Maggie, the housekeeper who had served the family for decades, was there, tenderly dusting the frames with a soft cloth. The elderly woman's hands trembled slightly, her eyes misty with memories. "They were good people," Maggie said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "The house has seen much sorrow, but also great love." Eleanor smiled gently, touched by Maggie's reverence. "I want to honor all of it," she said, "the good and the bad." Together, they moved through the house, identifying areas in desperate need of repair: the sagging roof, the peeling wallpaper, the creaky floorboards, but also marveling at the intricate woodwork, the stained glass windows, and the secret nooks that had sheltered so many untold stories. As evening fell, Eleanor stepped onto the veranda, the mansion silhouetted against an indigo sky streaked with fading light. Lanterns glowed softly through the windows, casting warm pools of light onto the freshly swept stone steps. A cool breeze carried the mingled scents of earth and wood polish, promising renewal. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future entwined in the night air. The restoration was just beginning, but already she sensed that this was more than bricks and mortar. It was a journey into the heart of a family's secrets and a testament to the enduring power of truth and memory. Eleanor's resolve hardened. Whatever lay ahead, she would see this through, not just as a caretaker of a mansion, but as a guardian of its story. And with that, the first chapter of the mansion's new life was quietly, irrevocably written. The first light of dawn filtered softly through the tall, arched windows of the Victorian mansion's grand foyer. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden beams, catching the quiet stillness of the morning. Eleanor Blake stood there, her fingers trailing along the worn wooden banister of the sweeping staircase, feeling the weight of the moments that had led her here. The house was no longer merely an inheritance. It had become a living testament to the past she had uncovered and the future she was determined to shape. The days since unraveling the century-old murder and the tangled family secrets had transformed Eleanor in ways she had scarcely expected. Where skepticism had once dominated her thoughts, there now bloomed a quiet reverence for the mansion and its stories. This place, with its creaking floorboards and faded wallpaper, spoke to her in a language she had only just begun to understand. It was a voice that told of love and betrayal, loss and hope, and above all, the enduring power of truth. Settling at the large oak desk that dominated the library, Eleanor carefully placed the archival boxes filled with the preserved letters and photographs she had meticulously sorted. The scratch of her pen on paper echoed softly in the spacious room as she began drafting a chronicler careful weaving of the mansion's history, the secrets she had uncovered, and the stories that had long awaited a voice. Each word felt like a promise, a bridge connecting past and present, ensuring that the lessons and legacies of those who had come before would not be forgotten. As evening fell, Eleanor found herself drawn to the fireplace, where the flickering flames cast dancing shadows across the walls. The warmth was welcome against the coolness that occasionally seeped from the stone walls, and the soft crackle of burning wood was a balm to her restless mind. Sipping tea, she reviewed restoration plans, her thoughts turning to the painstaking work ahead. The mansion was more than a building. It was a repository of memory and meaning, and she was its guardian now. Stepping outside into the overgrown garden path at dawn, Eleanor inhaled deeply. The scent of earth and blooming flowers filled the air, a fragrant reminder that even in neglect there was the promise of renewal. The first light illuminated new buds and shoots, their fragile beauty a symbol of growth and hope. Here, in this moment, Eleanor felt a profound connection to the land, the house, and the stories she carried forward. She knew the road ahead would be challenging. Balancing the preservation of history with the creation of a new life within these walls required patience, resilience, and a steadfast heart. Yet, as the sun rose higher, casting a warm glow over the estate, Eleanor embraced her role with renewed determination. This mansion was no longer a relic of the past. It was a beacon of possibility, and she was ready to be its keeper, its storyteller, and its soul. With a final glance back at the house, Eleanor smiled softly. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, she felt truly at home. The attic was silent, save for the soft rustling of brittle paper and the faint tapping of rain against the stained glass windows. Eleanor Blake stood amidst boxes, carefully labeled and stacked with the care of a curator. Her eyes scanning the delicate stacks of letters that had, only weeks ago, been forgotten relics hidden in the shadows of the mansion's forgotten corners. The air was thick with the scent of aged parchment and ink, a tangible connection to lives long past but now poised to speak anew. Margaret Finch, the archivist Eleanor had brought in, worked meticulously beside her, gently dusting off the fragile envelopes before laying them out on the oak table beneath the warm glow of a vintage lamp. "Each one tells a story," Margaret whispered, reverence heavy in her voice. "Our job is to ensure those stories don't fade with time." Eleanor nodded, the weight of this responsibility settling deep within her. What had begun as a skeptical investigation into a mystery had blossomed into a reverent mission to preserve a family's entire history, with all its shadows and light. The letters, penned by voices from the past Lillian's evocative confessions, cryptic notes hinting at hidden identities, and the confession letter that had cracked the century-old silence were more than mere evidence. They were the threads weaving the mansion's legacy. Dr. Henry Mallory entered quietly, his tweed jacket brushing softly against the wooden floor. He approached the table, his eyes shining behind gold-rimmed spectacles as he absorbed the collection before him. "These writings," he began, "are a remarkable window into Victorian society and its complexities. They reveal not only personal tragedy, but the broader cultural tensions of the era." As he spoke, the rain intensified, its rhythmic patter a gentle backdrop to their work. Eleanor felt the mansion breathe around hurts, creaks, and whispers, no longer ominous, but almost like a companion guiding her through the layers of history she was uncovering. James Whittaker, the local newspaper editor, soon joined them, eager to document the findings. His camera clicked softly, capturing high-resolution images of key letters and photographs. "The public deserves to know," James said, "not just the scandal, but the humanity behind it all." Eleanor agreed, her resolve strengthened. The preservation was not only about safeguarding fragile documents, but about illuminating truths long buried. Together, they planned an exhibition, an archival release that would invite historians and the public alike to engage with the mansion's past. Night deepened as Eleanor lingered in the attic, the archival boxes neatly arranged beside her. Twilight cast long shadows through the window, the last light of day slipping away like the secret she now held. Despite the melancholy that clung to the silence, there was hope, a promise that through these preserved letters, the voices of the past would continue to resonate, shaping the future. Eleanor penned a letter of her own, addressed to the unknown readers of the future. She wrote of truth and memory, of family and forgiveness, and the enduring power of stories to bridge time. Closing the letter, she placed it atop the carefully packed boxeaser, final piece of the legacy she was determined to protect. The mansion, once dormant and shrouded in mystery, was now alive with history reborn. And Eleanor Blake stood at its heart, the guardian of its truths, ready to share its story with the world. But as the night deepened, a quiet question lingered in her mind. What other secrets might the mansion yet conceal, waiting patiently in the shadows to be discovered? Eleanor Blake sat in the quiet sanctuary of the mansion's study. The familiar creak of the old floorboards beneath her chair grounding her as she faced the blank page on her typewriter. The green banker's lamp cast a warm halo over her workspace, highlighting the fine dust motes dancing in the air, remnants of the mansion's long neglected past. She took a deep breath, her fingers poised above the keys, heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This was more than just an article. It was the culmination of months of relentless investigation, late-night discoveries, and personal reckoning. Her first article aimed to unravel the tangled threads of the mansion's century-old mystery for the world, the story of lost letters, hidden identities, and a murder long buried beneath layers of family secrets. Eleanor wanted to honor the past while setting the record straight, weaving together the voices of those long departed with her own narrative voice. Each keystroke carried weight, a responsibility she did not take lightly. As the words flowed, Eleanor recounted the dusty attic discovery, the locked trunk brimming with letters from Lillian, and the shadows cast by a scandal that had fractured the family. She described the secret passages and the hidden room, the forbidden romance, and the betrayals that had culminated in murder. Her prose balanced clarity with intrigue, inviting readers to step into the Victorian mansion's eerie ambience and the complex web of human emotions that had ensnared its inhabitants. Days later, clutching the freshly typed manuscript, Eleanor traveled to the city newspaper office. The clatter of typewriters and the hum of printers filled the bustling newsroom, a stark contrast to the silent halls of the mansion. Henry Caldwell, the editor with whom she had developed a respectful rapport, greeted her with a knowing smile. He scanned her article, his eyes flicking rapidly across the pages, fingers tapping rhythmically on the wooden desk. "This is exceptional work, Eleanor," he said, setting the manuscript down. "The way you've captured the essence of the story, the mansion's aura and the human drama. It's compelling. Our readers will be captivated." Relief and pride washed over Eleanor. The validation from a seasoned editor signaled a turning point. Her story would reach beyond the shadowed walls of the mansion, touching lives and perhaps inspiring others to look beyond appearances and uncover hidden truths. Back at the mansion, Eleanor invited Margaret Sinclair, a historian and trusted family friend, to assist her in preparing supplementary materials for future articles. They spent long afternoons in the grand parlor, its ornate moldings and faded velvet curtains a testament to faded grandeur. Together, they carefully handled brittle documents and sepia-toned photographs, their whispered conversations mingling with the crackle of the fireplace. Margaret's keen insights enriched Eleanor's understanding, illuminating nuances in the letters and family lore. As the days passed, anticipation grew. The morning the article was published, Eleanor stood on the veranda, the early sunlight casting a golden glow over the sprawling estate. From her vantage point, she observed a small crowd gathering at the village newsstand, their faces alight with curiosity and animated discussion. The story had struck a chord, breathing new life into the mansion's legacy and stirring the community's imagination. Letters from readers began to arrive, some expressing sympathy, others sharing their own family mysteries, all drawn by Eleanor's vivid storytelling and unflinching commitment to truth. Her career as an investigative journalist was cemented, her name becoming synonymous with uncovering the hidden and giving voice to the silenced. Yet, despite the acclaim, Eleanor remained grounded. The mansion was not merely a story to be told, but a home she had vowed to restore and protect. The legacy she built was not just hers, but belonged to all who had walked those shadowed halls before her. With every article, every archived letter, every preserved secret, she wove a richer tapestry of history, memory, and redemption. As night fell, Eleanor returned to the study, her fingers once again hovering above the typewriter keys. The journey was far from over. There were more stories to uncover, more truths to reveal. But for now, she allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction, knowing that the mansion's whispers had finally found a voice worthy of listening. And as the candle flickered and the shadows deepened, Eleanor felt a profound connection to the past, a promise that the story of the Victorian mansion and its secrets would endure, safeguarded by her unwavering dedication and the power of the written word. With a final tap of the keys, she ended the chapter of discovery and opened the door to a new beginning, her journalist's legacy just beginning to unfold. The air hung heavy with the scent of aged wood and lingering memories as Eleanor Blake stepped onto the veranda, the dying light of the sun casting the sprawling estate in hues of amber and shadow. The once formidable mansion, now restored, yet still echoing with the whispers of its long and troubled history, seemed to breathe alongside her, its ancient walls holding secrets too vast to fully uncover. Eleanor's gaze swept across the manicured gardens, the rustling leaves whispering softly in the evening breeze, a stark contrast to the turbulent days that had recently passed. She drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the cool air seeping through the fabric, mingling with the warmth of her thoughts. The mansion had changed her, reshaped her understanding not only of the house itself, but of the tangled web of human emotions, love, betrayal, grief that had played out within these walls. The letters, the hidden rooms, the confrontations, all had left their mark. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eleanor found herself contemplating what it meant to truly lay ghosts to rest. Turning away from the veranda, Eleanor moved into the quiet sanctuary of the study, the flicker of candlelight dancing across the spines of countless books and the neatly archived letters that had become her companions. She lifted the final sealed envelope from its resting place, her fingers tracing the delicate script on its surface. The silence enveloped her, broken only by the faint scratch of pen meeting paper as she began to write her own reflections, weaving her story into the tapestry of those who had come before. The study's large windows framed the night sky, stars shimmering faintly through the gathering mist. Eleanor's mind wandered to the faces she had come to know, Lillian's passionate words, the enigmatic stranger's warnings, the fractured family members whose secrets had slowly unraveled. Each letter was a voice from the past, a fragment of truth pieced together through patient investigation and quiet determination. Later, in the glow of the fireplace, Eleanor found herself in conversation with Samuel Reed, a steadfast friend who had been a quiet pillar during her journey. The fire crackled, sending flickers of golden light across the richly patterned rugs and worn leather chairs. Their voices were low, the weight of the revelations they had shared settling comfortably between them. "Do you think the mansion will ever truly rest?" Samuel asked, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Eleanor sighed softly, the embers reflecting in her thoughtful eyes. "Perhaps not," she replied. But maybe it's not about the mansion resting, but about us learning to live with its stories, honoring them without being haunted. The night deepened, and when Eleanor finally rose to leave, she paused at the attic door, the gateway to the past. Her hand lingered on the worn wood, a silent farewell to the secrets it had guarded for so long. With a gentle push, she closed it, the click of the latch echoing softly in the stillness. It was an end, yet the shadows that clung to the corners of the mansion whispered that some mysteries were meant to endure. As Eleanor stepped back into the cool night air, a sense of bittersweet resolution settled over her. The mansion was no longer just a place of walls and windows. It was a living chronicle of love and loss, courage and deceit. And in embracing its legacy, Eleanor found not only the echoes of the past, but a new beginning, one where truth and memory intertwined, guiding her forward. Yet, as the stars blinked above and the wind murmured through the trees, a question remained suspended in the quiet. Could she truly move forward while carrying the weight of the mansion's enduring shadows? The answer, Eleanor knew, would unfold in time, as all stories do. For now, she was home. Eleanor Blake adjusted the strap of her satchel as she pulled up to the iron gates of the mansion. The sky was a dull grey, threatening rain, casting a somber mood over the sprawling estate. She hesitated for a moment, taking in the sight before her. The Victorian mansion rose like a forgotten relic, its once grand turrets and gables now draped in tangled ivy and the creeping touch of time. The gravel crunched beneath her boots as she pushed open the gate, its hinges protesting with a screech. The estate agent, Mr. Harris, awaited her at the entrance, his expression polite but tinged with fatigue. "Welcome, Miss Blake. It's quite a place, isn't it?" he said, gesturing toward the looming structure. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. "It's certainly something," she replied, her tone measured, betraying a flicker of skepticism. The property had arrived to her unexpectedly, bequeathed under peculiar circumstances by a distant relative she scarcely remembered. Crossing the threshold, Eleanor was greeted by Mrs. Collins, the housekeeper, whose quiet presence suggested years of silent witness to the mansion's secrets. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of aged wood. Eleanor's footsteps echoed through the grand foyer as she surveyed the faded grandeur, cracked marble floors, walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow her every move. She moved through the rooms with a practiced eye, noting the peeling wallpaper, the heavy drapes dulled by neglect, and the scattered remnants of a once vibrant household. In the library, rows of cracked leather-bound books lined the shelves, their titles obscured by time. Eleanor ran her fingers over the spines, feeling the weight of history. A sudden creak of floorboards reminded her she was alone in this vast, silent house. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows as dark clouds gathered overhead. Eleanor stepped onto the veranda just as the first drops of rain began to fall, mingling with the earthy scent of the overgrown garden. The storm seemed to echo the unease stirring within her. This inheritance was more than a simple property transfer, and she was determined to uncover its hidden truths. As the day faded into evening, Eleanor sat by the fire, penning a letter to her editor, capturing her first impressions and the questions already swirling in her mind. The mansion's silence was broken only by the distant roll of thunder, a reminder that the past was never truly at rest here. Her skepticism remained, but beneath it, a spark of curiosity kindled. What stories lay buried within these walls, and what shadows lurked in the corners of her newfound home? The journey had begun.